OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.
And a very good morning to you. Welcome along to OTB AM this Monday morning. I hope you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, just like myself and Eoin Sheahan. Eoin, good morning to you.
Very good morning. What a beautiful day it is.
Yeah, the weather's going to be really good for at least the next 2 or 3 days. So, let's celebrate that. The whole country was out over the course of the weekend, enjoying themselves, having sunshine, and life seemed fairly normal.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Though really, it doesn't feel normal at all. No, sunshine is a good thing, but everybody's still enjoying it in the confines of their own back garden. Yeah, it sounded like it was a lovely thing to be able to do, to actually be able to sit outside and say, I've got nowhere to go. I've got nothing to do right now, which is always a positive. But no, it doesn't. I disagree. It does
Really?
not feel normal just because the sun is shining. It feels like the end of a school term.
Were you not out and about? Like, it seemed like a lot of people were just like, it's not a real thing anymore. It seemed like a lot of people just decided we're going to walk in groups on the footpath and we're going to play football. I saw like a fairly intense game of football going on at one stage, 7 aside, 6 aside. It's like, all right, I see what you're doing there. Fair enough.
Did actually see the exact same thing yesterday, to be honest with you. It could have been the exact same park that we walked past, actually. And now that you say it, it's only just struck me. I actually didn't even cop that yesterday. I was going past it, and I was like, there's that park is quite busy today. And that was the only thing that went through my head. It did not go through my head. Oh, there's a sport event taking place right there. So yeah, there you go. That's clearly I have not even adjusted to the new normal.
Or else there is no new normal and everybody's just skipped that bit and gone straight to the old normal. It's like, like that was just a bunch of stuff that happened. There was a little bit of that. I would definitely say there was a bang of that going on. We're going to talk about the golf last night, where 2 American footballers and 2 golfers entertained, it seems like, the masses. And this was on CNN in Ireland. I didn't understand why it wasn't on one of the sports channels, but obviously a mass audience was reached.
Yeah, TNT over in the States is what had it, and it was brilliant. We'll chat about this a little bit later on. It was something that you couldn't actually turn off. It was a vast improvement on Tiger versus Phil, the match 1.0. You throw into Super Bowl winners, you throw in a great commentary team, and you've got just a perfect event, and you couldn't turn away. It was just a shame that the ads actually happened. Otherwise, you were in red zone territory where you actually felt you couldn't turn this thing off.
We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. Coming up, we have the greatest rugby moments in the history of the Aviva Stadium since it's been renamed. So the last decade, Alan Quinlan is going to join us for that. We're talking football news over the course of the weekend with Phil. We're going to talk about the Bundesliga, Timo Werner and whatever else you're having this morning. If you want to suggest a football story that we'll chat for you, we can do some digging on it. 087 9180 180 is the WhatsApp number. And today, it is the good people of Cavan who are chiselling out Mount Rushmore on one of the little drumlins somewhere around the Sleeve Russell. Katrina McKiernan obviously going to be on it, but who else? Paul Brady, yes. Who else? Who are the ones that are going to make the final 2? We'll get into that at around about 9:15 this morning, though. First, let's hear from yesterday's Sunday paper review with Ryle Nugent, Tommy Martin and Joe.
We have Ryle Nugent with us and Tommy Martin with us. We'll finish off our discussion on the Pat Spillane piece. So just a few points, because I take Ryle, you made the point that, we should be very careful about shutting down opinion or questioning, and I absolutely don't want to be seen to do that. Everybody has the right to an opinion, and we should, of course, be questioning what's happening in terms of what the government are doing. Fintan O'Toole, amongst others, had a brilliant piece about 2 weeks ago and was wondering aloud as to why an emergency plan which had been put in place relatively recently, and it was to cover pandemics as well, was completely ignored once this whole thing kicked off and a new plan was put in place. And he wondered if that was one of the reasons why the nursing homes weren't given due attention until too late in this whole scenario. So the government are not above or beyond reproach or questioning. My point on this is, and I feel like it's crept up on the GA of late, where increasingly we're pointing to numbers and we're saying, look at this, look how low the numbers are, and it's great to see them come down, but look how low they are, as if that has all happened independent of the measures that we've all taken. So when I see lines in his piece like we've become too safe and cagey, like that's a big statement to make. And like this thing can get out of control in no time. And it's very easy to say, throw open the gates to our youngsters. But if you're going to make that statement, then I think your piece has to go into the many complicated logistics and how do you see that and why and how do you back it up? And that piece doesn't do that for me. It's too easy to throw a general statement.
I completely agree with you, Joe, on that one. That's why I brought up that line, throw open the gates. It's such a, columnist, happy line a columnist use. Like it's low stakes punditry. You can just write it and it'll make a good headline and it'll sell a piece, and a certain amount of people will go, yeah, geez, he's damn right, isn't he? And my instinct was like yours, Joe, in that like we're going to take public health advice from Pat Spillane now. Even Colin O'Rourke last week, you could argue, look, Colin O'Rourke is a principal of a school, and the piece was a lot about the education side of it as well, and okay, a little bit like that, but there is lines in this which are completely, like the line about, like you said there, about we've gotten too cagey and careful. It's like, oh my God, like we just had the biggest public health pandemic crisis in a century. Like it's okay, being a bit cagey is actually okay. But then at the end of the day, like as I said earlier, there is going to be a natural human response to this, and it's in pieces like this, but it's also in, if you go to the park on Tuesday or Monday, whatever day that the so-called restrictions were slightly eased, and for a certain cohort of the people, social distancing is finished. Yeah. It's gone. Yeah. They're done. They're done with it. And there is the twitching curtain tendency to kind of go, oh, look at those people. Look at there, what are they thinking? Is this disgrace? And put up pictures on Twitter and all that. And then there's just the understanding that managing the public perception of this crisis and how people are dealing with it is part of the overall job of the authorities. Media commentary is just a part of that. People got through the initial phase of, yes, doffing our caps, doing what we were told. Now we're in we've all read a lot about this. We've all, even the experts have been contradicted by other experts on things like face masks and on things like transmission through children. So naturally there's going to be discussion and contradiction and all those things. And it's up to the people who are in charge to hold the line. And if you listen to them carefully, because people are now getting a bit fed up of listening to the same stuff all the time from the likes of Tony Holohan, Killian DeGaskin and Ronan Glynn, all these people, what they're saying is, we're going to continue looking at the evidence. Yes, there have been studies in Denmark and places like that showing transmissions are low amongst kids, but it's still early days. We're not quite sure we want to make that call yet. We'll continue to do it. Not very sexy. It doesn't sound as good as throw open the gates of our GA pitches, but that's where they have to be at.
I want to make it very clear. There's no part of me here defending Pat Spillane, and there may have been in a previous life I might have defended Pat to the end. What I'll say here is I think that there is something in what Tommy's just said. You go back to last Tuesday and you go into your local park and you look around and you just look at the attitude of people, and it had fundamentally changed. I think we all accept that. Now, what I also think is that the attitude of the policing of the rules had fundamentally changed, where you were stopped, and I had experience being stopped 3 and 4 times in one day, to a point where I haven't seen a guard checkpoint since last Monday, maybe one. And I think the relaxation outside of the relaxing of the rules has painted that a conflict for people, where there is a contradiction in many people's minds as to what's being said and to what is actually happening. And let me be very clear. I don't agree with large swathes of what Pat is saying, and I think there are some really easy shots here. But do I think that we should shut down even easy shots and people making them? Is it helpful? I'm sure the GAA will say it's not helpful, Pat Spillane making comments like this. Does that mean that people shouldn't be entitled to their view? Joe, you said it at the start of this piece. I don't think we can get into that territory. I think you've got to let people say and then judge it on the merits as you see it.
Agreed. Yeah, can agree on that point for sure. So we spent longer on that than I had thought we would, actually. I literally sent you a piece saying we'll do a brief mention of that at the top, and here we are at 2:10. Okay. So, to jump off on another point, let's stick with the GAA theme for a moment, because it's a great picture on the back page of the Sunday Times, and it's Philly McMahon talking to Dennis Walsh. I know he's talked a lot about this, and people may feel, look, I'm familiar with the work that he's doing, but there's lots of good little exchanges and insights in it, Tommy. I'm helping good guys. I'm helping good guys who made bad choices. He's talking about his work in prison.
Yeah, I thought, probably like yourself, when I saw it, I thought, look, very worthwhile, but I've heard Philip McMahon talk about the stuff before, but actually thought it really hit home to me in the moment, because I think especially if we are going to be embarking on another, era of austerity, or if not austerity, at least some kind of recession or depression, where there will be hard choices and there will be, pain to be taken by different people in society. The one thing that comes through with what Philly McMahon does and has done in his work going into place, his general work and his work in Mountjoy Prison, and he's going into work in the Midlands Prison now, doing gym classes and fitness classes, and also then life coaching as well, is the fact that, and it obviously comes from his own personal experience with his brother John, who was a heroin addict and then died 8 years ago, is that, to see through the eyes of these people and see beyond what they are as criminals or addicts and to the people within. And it's, there's a tendency in society to see to see a natural order of things, to see that the people who have are there because they work harder and they're better, and they're, and it's a kind of a Darwinian model of society that the best get to the top, and that's just the way it is. And the people who fall into addiction and crime are, to use that word, scumbags, that they are some way detritus in society and are there because they are in some way inferior. Like, it's Darwinian, Nietzschean, it's all these kind of debates. But what Philly McMahon is doing is exposing that and he is in a brilliantly unique position to do that. And as you mentioned there, the good people line. So just read this paragraph here about his work in the prisons. I never turned my nose up against guys that made bad choices. I didn't. When you go in there and spend time, especially in the progression unit, that's a unit where prisoners who are about to be released into society can get training and help. You realise that these lads, they're good people once they've learned from the mistake they've made. It's very hard to say that a prisoner is a good person, but when you sit down and talk to them and you look at their backgrounds and their psychological needs and what's happened to them in life, and you peel back society's issues, you can see it. And in that one paragraph, you can sum up so much about what we have to keep in mind about, about money for mental health, money for addiction health, money for education, money for, all those sort of decisions that might have to be made over the next few years to make sure people aren't left behind.
To extend the point you made, McMahon tells the story of an inmate he met in the protection unit where prisoners are sent when they've been in trouble. When you're looking at this guy, you're nearly looking through his eyes like he's not there. You can see he's got issues that prison is not going to help. So I said, how did you end up in here in the first place? He said, it's your fault, actually. I said, what? He says, I'm a Dublin fan. He's won the All-Ireland. I went on the piss and a lot of stuff came out of me. I battered my neighbour and I ended up in prison. Now, nobody would take anything but a dim view of somebody getting drunk and battering their neighbour. But then he goes on to say, McMahon could tell there was more to the story. He kept probing. And McMahon says here, a good percentage of men in Mountjoy have been sexually abused. This man was molested by the manager of his football team when he was a boy. He said, if I go to sleep without a tablet, I wake up in the middle of the night thinking there's a man's hand over my face. McMahon says, he's out now, but I think he'll end up back in there. I really, really hope he doesn't, but he's got a psychological need that needs to be met. And I would think something like that, Ryle, applies to a staggering percentage of people who end up with addiction issues or in prison.
Look, I think it highlights what we've been talking about in a different way, which is the mental and physical well-being of people at this particular snapshot in this moment in time. I was obviously, like you guys, quite aware of Philly McMahon's involvement here, but what I found my takeaway from the piece was when McMahon looks back, he can trace the path that led him here. He was always good with people. He was interested in people. I suppose I've been coaching since I was 17 or 18. I'm not talking about football. I suppose you could class it as life coaching. When I opened my gym, the reason why it scaled up 3 sizes is because we coached people. We understood we could get the most out of them in an hour, changing the emotions of people through fitness. A lot of people we have would say, this is our happy place. I think that sums it up.
Yeah. That's on the back page of the Sunday Times and continues on page 23. On that same page then, seeing as it's here and open in front of us both, the new Lance Armstrong documentary airs on ESPN this evening. It's in two parts. David Walsh has obviously seen certainly the first part, if not both. This is Marina Zenovic's work. She has done the documentary with him. And Walsh gives us impressions of different parts of the documentary. 8 interviews were conducted with Armstrong, and I mean,
it's remarkable, isn't it?
Well, take this as a point in it, and I in a way, you know, we've all had our fill of Armstrong, but in other ways, we still know nothing, and you feel like there hasn't been an honest unpacking of things on his behalf. So, for instance, Walsh writes that Zenovic's style is to quietly ask the question, some innocuous, some seemingly innocuous, stuff emerges. Could the drugs have caused his cancer? Armstrong leans towards that view that maybe they did. In 1996, he says, was the only time I did growth hormone. He speculates that the HGH is likely to grow bad cells as well as good ones. Later on, and this maybe was the part that jumped out at everybody the most, but certainly me, he's in Rice University in Houston, where his son Luke is a freshman. So his son Luke is an accomplished offensive linesman, writes Walsh. What would he say to his son, Armstrong is asked in the documentary, if he ever wanted to take performance-enhancing drugs? The reply is, I would say, that's a bad idea. You're a freshman in college. It might be a different conversation if you were in the NFL, but at this point in your career, not worth it. And Armstrong likes a different conversation if he could earn money from doping. Zenovic left it at that. I mean, even that jumps out as his own son, Tommy, if he was in the NFL and asked his father, should he dope or take performance-enhancing drugs? He said, that's a different conversation if you're in the NFL.
I think the sort of idea of, you know, this piece or the documentary is like an investigation of whether, like, is there a second life for Lance Armstrong? Like, is there another chapter where, you know, it's like the George Foreman George Foreman went from the, you know, terrifying killer to the lovable, you know, grill salesman. What is the second life for Lance Armstrong? And the problem is that it's impossible for him to come across as anything other than in any way as objectionable as he has been for the last decade. And the fact is, he's neither in nor out, because you have the next paragraph where he says that he has regrets about how he treated Emma O'Reilly and one-time fellow rider Filippo Simeone. Inexcusable. For that, I'm truly sorry. I wish I could have been a better man. All I can do is say I'm sorry and move on. But, you know, he's not. He's not really sorry. He's not really grappled and done the whole, you know, the whole Hallmark TV movie redemption story. When he's still, as you say, the paragraph about he wouldn't mind his son taking steroids if it got him a big NFL contract. Or again, in the next paragraph in David Walsh's article, where he talks about his feelings about Floyd Landis. You know, he's not redeemed. He's not. It's not a redemption story. He's just still Lance Armstrong. He's just the most. But actually, sorry, just a final point from me on this. Just to link in with what we were talking about Philly McMahon. The interesting thing is, and we'll get on to Michael Jordan and we'll talk about this, is what makes these people like this. And Walsh mentions his upbringing, his stepfather, Terry Armstrong, who used to, as Lance says, he beat the shit out of me. And then his mother, who basically, you know, seemed to kind of treat him like a cosseted, you know, a little prince who could get away with anything. And it's just there's a little snapshot there of maybe some of the things that, like, people are products of their environment. So that point comes through again.
Yeah, I think it's interesting whether he's still able to generate significant revenues for himself, despite his unspeakable fall from grace. I have to say, I'm struggling to think of anyone I find more objectionable in sport in the last 20 years. And he's had some stiff competition on occasions. But when you look at the number, it says it generates Armstrong's take on the world's greatest bike race has become hugely popular. This is about a podcast. For 3 weeks of the tour, his podcast sits towards the top of the Apple charts in the US. It generates $1 million in revenue. Like, what life lesson, if you're dealing with the 12-year-old Lance Armstrong, has he learned? Which is, you say you're sorry, you repeat the mistake, and you feel marginal amount of punishment, pain, like not the full weight of the destruction that you caused is back with you to try and understand. At least that's the way it feels and seems to be right now. And I think David Walsh's last line is really telling. There's a cliche out there that Armstrong just can't help himself. Lance, the name of the documentary, feels like confirmation. And it's hard to get away from. I found that piece about his son quite staggering.
And he's intelligent enough to know how that would be perceived. And that's a very easy lie to tell. Oh, absolutely, I wouldn't recommend it. I've learned how it's just an abhorrent thing to do. And ultimately, it doesn't serve you well in the long term either. So I would tell him, avoid it, learn from me. That is the simple PR line to give. And yet he gives the honest answer. And he's intelligent enough to know how that will be received. And yet he gives it anyway, which makes me question, what is his motivation here, Tommy? What's he trying to achieve with a documentary like this?
Yeah, it's like he as I said, he's neither repentant and fully redeemed and you know, sorry for what he did and realizes I was totally wrong. On one hand, he's that, and then on the other hand, he's trying to justify what he did. In other words, saying that, like, well, you know, that's what I did was completely natural, because if you have a chance of making loads of money, you would do this. And later on the piece, he talks about, you know, the hypocrisy of some people are vilified, but some people are, you know, Jan Ulrich, you went to visit him, vilified, whereas somebody else who's idolized, you know, the hypocrisy in it, which might be a valid enough point, but he's neither one or the other. So you can't necessarily, you know, he's just this grotesque character, like a mangled, you know, like a mangled version of what he was, you know, put through the ringer of the last decade, and he's come out as this sort of this hideous, you know, mix of pity, self-pity, and you know, and self-justification as well. I think that comes out really well. But the stuff about the parents is really interesting. I think it's always remember these people everybody's a product of their environment. I think it hints at that's an interesting story as well. It's mentioned towards the... Sorry, Ryle, go ahead, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I found the anticipation around the Jordan documentary really compelling, and I couldn't wait to get my hands and head wrapped around it. Yeah. I have absolutely no desire. I will watch this at some point down the road when I feel like I can stomach it, but I ain't reaching for this in the way I was reaching for Jordan. And it's a nice segue for me over to the Tommy Conlon piece on Jordan, because, like, Lance Armstrong would rightly have been in the list, probably on the long list of the greatest sports people of all time, when you look at Jordan and Tiger Woods and Babe Ruth, Muhammad Ali, Pele, Maradona, Messi, Usain Bolt and Roger Federer. They're the names that are on the long list for Tommy. You could debate that all day and night. But the engagement with Jordan on the story that was told over 10 weeks on the Netflix documentary, and the engagement with Armstrong, like, I just can't stomach it. And not everything about Jordan was wonderful, and we'll get onto that in a moment. But the Armstrong thing, it feels like he's become a caricature of himself at this point.
Yes. I was struggling to verbalise it, Tommy. You've done it perfectly when you said self-pity. That is the overriding motif, actually, self-pity, that I was kind of forced to do this, and you know, so it's interesting as well towards the end that Walsh notes last December Zenovich sent a copy of the finished documentary to Armstrong. Unlike, I presume, Michael Jordan, he didn't like it, is the point. He didn't like it, and he was a notable absentee when the documentary was premiered at Sundance in January. He has played no part in the promotion of the film, and Walsh says he shouldn't blame Zenovich. All she did was give him rope. So that's available from this evening, whatever way you want to get it, but it's courtesy of ESPN. I think the COVID period thus far, if we're to talk about the cultural aspects which have dominated, it is Normal People and it is The Last Dance. So they are the two, I think, which have captured the mood massively. Tommy Martin's written a 2-page spread on The Last Dance. Points out.
No, I haven't.
Tommy Conlon.
Tommy Conlon. Jeez, the multi-talented Tommy Martin has. So Tommy Conlon has written about The Last Dance. This, I think everybody's pretty familiar at this stage with the 10-part story on ESPN alone, and that is to exclude the many of us who have all watched it on Netflix as well. ESPN alone, between reruns and same-day viewers and across the week, the first episode has reached 15 million since its premiere. So I presume a multiple of that have watched this series. It's been criticised in some quarters. Tommy references Ken Burns, the brilliant documentary maker, the Civil War, the Vietnam documentary as well. If you are there influencing the very fact of it getting made, this is Burns talking about the fact that Jordan is a co-producer. He says it means certain aspects that you don't necessarily want in aren't going to be in, period. And that is not the way you do good journalism, and it's certainly not the way you do good history. Now, the director of the series was Jason Hare, and he says it was never a case of don't show this, take this out, bleep this out, delete this from Jordan. There was never one thing that he asked us to remove. I'm sure Ken Burns would argue that subconsciously or otherwise you will have a feel for what the protagonist may or may not like. And that said, and I'll throw it to you, Ryle, then on this point, Tommy later does make the observation that we've all had. No one, despite those reservations of Ken Burns, no one escapes from his all-seeing eye. If The Last Dance has whitewashed Jordan as alleged, the painters did not do a thorough job. There are scabs of ugliness peppered all over the wall. The portrait includes images of Jordan, the paranoid, the petty-minded, the bully. He is shown mocking Jerry Krause. He is shown at practice belittling Scott Burrell, a squad player who was not meeting the Jordan standard. Will Perdue says, let's not get it wrong. He was an asshole. He was a jerk. He crossed the line numerous times. So, 10-parter, you enjoyed it. You were consumed by it like so many.
Yeah, how could you not have been if you have an interest in sport? I think any interest in sport, even passing, and even in fact, if you don't, I think this is a seminal piece of documentary making. I think sports documentary making, as with any, but obviously sport is the area of expertise for us all. It's not perfect. There's always going to be critics who say that isn't how it happened, or that's not how I remembered it, or you haven't told it, or you haven't contextualized it correctly. What this did have was 10, 50-minute episodes. Most documentaries, you might get a feature length that's an hour and a half or 2 hours, but most are 52 minutes and deal with significant detail in that. And I get criticized. So I don't think you're ever going to produce anything that everybody goes, yes, that was it, captured perfectly, and no arguments or dispute afterwards. There's quotes in lots of social media and the newspapers yesterday that Scottie Pippen is absolutely enraged by his portrayal and that Jordan has let him down hugely, and a lot of other players. Some players weren't even interviewed because the belief was that Jordan just didn't rate them, didn't like them, didn't believe that they played their part, and that's why they weren't part of the documentary. I don't know whether you buy any or all of that. Is it perfect? No. But is it a compelling piece of sports television over 10 weeks, highlighted by the fact it happened or was produced in a moment where there was so little else to engage us? I thought it was terrific.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
OTB's Mount Rushmore. 32 counties, one county representative choosing their sporting Mount Rushmore. Some decisions are easy.
Number one cornerstone on this monument is Stephen Staunton. And I would wager that by the age of 21, he probably had a CV like on par with anything we've seen in Irish sport.
Others are controversial.
Michael Murphy might actually be debated as whether he deserved to be there any more than some of the players from 1992.
Join the debate across all our social channels at Off the Ball.
Galway is so diverse. I think Galway people can feel fairly proud of themselves.
And catch the live decision-making over the next few months on OTB AM, live every weekday at 7:30 AM on OTB Sports Radio.
OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.
Yeah, great stuff on the paper review there, talking about The Last Dance and the Lance Armstrong documentary, which aired last night on ESPN and which is on tonight on BT Sport. We're going to talk about that on tomorrow's show. I'm in two minds, Eoin, about how much I'm looking forward to this. It's a little bit like when you're watching, I think, Succession, and it's quite cringy, and you're like, oh, and then you lean in. And that's kind of what I expect to happen tonight when I'm watching this.
Think you were going to get swept away?
I'm going to lean in. I'm going to let this filth wash over me one more time.
What happens when you lean in Succession? Well,
you don't
washed over by it. What then happens?
You don't turn it off. You're like, oh, I can't watch this. Oh, this is terrible. Give me more. That's the experience that I'm groping for here.
Or just a cold shower.
You're obsessed with your cold showers. I don't really understand the metaphor there. Go on.
Well, it's just an unpleasant experience and you want to get out of it quickly.
Right.
That's, rather than saying this is a filthy thing and I want more of it. I don't think I've ever been in that situation where it's like, this is clearly something I don't like, give me more. But
The Office,
yeah,
I suspect, is like the US Office. This is kind of what I'm talking about. You're like, oh, I can't watch this. This is terrible. Oh, look at the torment that is being visited upon these people. Give me more.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what it is interesting that he's done like 8 interviews for this, for 2 episodes. Like comparatively, Michael Jordan did 3 interviews for 10 episodes. There's going to be a lot of Lance Armstrong on our television screens if we choose to watch this over the next 2 weeks. There's going to be a lot of his truth, as he puts it, over the next 2 weeks. I'm looking forward to it, personally. I don't really understand. Like, fair enough if Ryan Nugent was saying earlier on that he's so appalled by the figure that he can't really bring himself to watch it. I think fair enough. I think people who take a different stance on it and are going to take the moral high ground by not watching it, I don't really understand that, because I think you can watch something and not respect it. I think you can have a look at it yourself, and as a human being you can critically analyse it yourself. I don't think automatically if you watch something you have to be swept away by it and completely have your worldview changed on a subject just by watching something. So people are smart enough to make their own minds up on Lance Armstrong, despite spending whatever it's going to be 4 hours over the next week or so watching his face put forward his truth.
We'll come back to this tomorrow. Last night, was there a villain in the match, or was it just a bunch of people playing golf and having the crack and making money for charity?
But it is hard to pick a villain in those sort of circumstances. Tom Brady, I guess, was the golfing villain and was kind of the every person's hero for about 6 holes last night, where he was playing absolutely horrifically badly. It was so relatable. It was so good to see. I was like, Tom Brady, you are one of us. At long last, we have finally brought you down to the mortal line where people started to actually question whether or not he was playing off 8, because that was reportedly what his handicap is. Then he steps up to the 7th hole, great approach shot, takes out a wedge, hits the green, ball rolls beautifully back towards the cup and into the cup, and then Tom Brady has finally arrived. He starts talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. His words per minute ratio goes through the ceiling, and all of a sudden the snarl is back. It feels like Atlanta. It feels like he's 28-3 down, but he's just got that first touchdown and they're on the way back. Of course, they don't end up winning because he's playing against somebody called Tiger Woods, who tends to be quite good at golf, and it's not his own game. But it was unbelievably entertaining stuff. As we were saying earlier on, it's very, very hard to turn off an event like this. Turns out voyeurism is actually something that interests everybody, because this is what it is. You're actually just watching 4 people having the chats, playing average golf.
So why was this week better than last week? What was different?
The trash talk was better. The broadcasting was better. Charles Barkley was better than anything they had on show last week. Justin Thomas is actually quite good. Charles Barkley and Justin Thomas, if Justin Thomas wants to pack it in right now and just get into a broadcasting career, I would be more than happy for the guy, because he's actually quite an interesting fella. He's quite funny. Himself and Charles Barkley had a good few jibes between them. I think, in fairness, it helps when the guard is down, when obviously it's for charity and it is completely lighthearted and all the players are fairly lighthearted. Like, Thomas always struck me as somebody who is an incredibly serious man. He obviously got somebody thrown off the golf course before for kind of trash talking him. And I never really liked Thomas, but turns out when he gets to let his hair down a small bit and focus on something that's not a major championship, he's actually quite an enjoyable character to listen to. And then also you had like decent trash talk between Tom Brady and Phil Mickelson and Tiger. Phil was pretty funny. last night, as well as funny as he can be. And maybe that's something that kind of made it even more enjoyable. You don't expect golfers to be these entertaining, charismatic, funny guys. And when they are a little bit funny, when they're a 2 out of 10 on the funny scale, it kind of feels like an 8 out of 10.
Okay, so that's the quality of the people involved, and it looked like they learned. How important was it to have normal sports people out there as opposed to just golfers? Did that actually add to the mix? The Brady being completely rubbish added to the mix to the point where people were like, oh my God, this guy is absolutely crap. How could he possibly? He doesn't deserve a place out there. And it seemed to have an impact on Mickelson, the bit that I watched, where Mickelson also played really badly while Tom Brady was playing really badly.
Yeah, I definitely think that having the two guys out there, and actually the relatability, as I say, with Tom Brady for a little while was kind of compelling. But I don't think it keeps you coming. I just think it was the entertaining television spectacle that it was. And like it's a chat show meeting a golf competition. That's what it was last week in the previous competition. And that's what it kind of was this week as well. Like they didn't have Donald Trump up on the line this week, but they managed to go close. They got Alex Rodriguez up on the line for a bit. They got various callers up, and that's kind of the format they're going for. And it's not the worst thing in the world, to be honest with you. It's entertaining. It's definitely lively. You could actually do without ad breaks, and it would still be good to watch, which is saying something for a floorball, really. I think these things are actually hugely successful. They can keep doing them because it's one of the safest sports you can play right now.
Who is the alpha dog? Peyton Manning, Tiger Woods, Tom Brady, Phil Mickelson. Who's the alpha?
Tom Brady, isn't he?
I don't know. I mean, Tiger Woods, right?
Like Tiger Woods is in his comfort zone more than any of those other people last night. But I think Tom Brady certainly has the chest-pounding team sport jock guy about him way more than anybody else. Even Peyton Manning, you can see he's kind of like when Tom Brady chipped in on the 7th last night.
He didn't celebrate. He didn't celebrate. He didn't really celebrate. There was no like arms in the air. There was no. It was almost like he didn't believe it had happened.
But maybe there was a bit of that. But I certainly felt an inherent sense of testosterone rising through the television screen watching it. I just felt that the cockiness, the confidence of Tom Brady was quietly and slowly rising through every pore in his body. And that was how he celebrated. A deep satisfaction, like he has finally made the promised land. I did this not only in front of Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson, which is an amazing thing to do in itself, but I did this in front of millions of people watching at home. And look how amazing I am.
And he had started so badly that people were beginning to question everything they knew about him, like to the point where everybody was gambling that he wasn't going to make a par on the front nine. And Brooks Koepka was like 100 grand if this guy makes a par on the front nine. Barkley had another 50 grand, so he won a lot of money for charity with the chipping in. All right, well look, let's leave that there. You think that it's a good thing that you want to see a bit more of on a Saturday night until the real golf comes back. Is there a future in this? Maybe the bit of trash talking and everybody mic'd up, and actually this might make golf more interesting. It might suck you in versus flicking over to Red Zone.
I think so. Like, why not? I think certainly they're going to do another gimmick like Tiger versus Phil down the line. Last night actually kind of shows the template for it, that maybe you give them a playing partner, and you certainly do it on this level. Like, admittedly, I didn't really watch much of the previous Tiger versus Phil. I saw bits of it. I don't remember it being as entertaining on a broadcast level as this whatsoever.
Well, because it was for real money as well. That's the problem, isn't it? It was for real money.
True. Yeah, that probably had a bit of a part to play. Like, I think if you mic people up during a major, for example, I think what you get is largely going to be silence, is it not? You'll probably get a few insights here and there, but people are very much in the zone. Like, they were having the crack last night, which made it an entertaining spectacle. Over time, the fact that they're not playing for a real trophy that matters will obviously wear down on you. As a novelty, I think it worked beautifully last night.
Why is trash talking allowed? So I was just thinking, like, if in that sport, for example, one of the bits that I saw, there was a problem with Mickelson's earpiece in his backswing, he said, which was the reason why his shot careered off to the right-hand side. Nothing to do with his bad form at the moment. Definitely not. Nothing to do with that. You know, you can't have trash talk in golf because there's money on the line. But you have trash talk in basketball where somebody's at the free throw line and an entire championship is on the line. And, you know, it's not that the money is on the line based on the outcome, but it is really. Like all their endorsements, all their reputation is on the line. But you're allowed to go up and say basically what you want to somebody at the free throw line. Why can't you do it in the middle of somebody's backswing?
I think it's the culture in golf, isn't it? McIlroy was saying this recently, that it really is everybody just focusing on themselves, which is a really boring thing to say. And I know Brooks Koepka is somebody who's been a bit of an outlier in that, where he's been texting his mates saying, I want to go out there and crush Rory McIlroy. Like in basketball, it's about crushing your opponent. It's about, if you manage to dunk over your opponent, that is worth its weight in gold. It's not just worth the 2 points. Whereas in golf, it kind of seems that if I look after myself, I'm going to be okay. I can't really do anything to stop the other guy. But you can if you get inside their head and trash talk them. But they just don't seem to do it. There's too much respect these days. Hopefully last night now will be the first semblance of disrespect creeping into golf. That would make the world a more enjoyable place.
Yeah, it's like, got to be careful what you're calling for here. But
I'm all for it.
But think about it, right? Wouldn't it be a much better thing? Wouldn't you be happy to watch a little bit of... Everybody would be disgusted. It would be horrific. Somebody would take it too far. It'd be a disaster. The game would be ruined. There'd be fights on public courses all around the country. I don't know. I mean, it might be a bit more... We'd all join, right? You'd get the juice flowing a little bit easier. Let's move on. We've just solved golf. That's fine. 11 minutes past 8 this morning. I think Sheahan Hannon is with us. Shane, good morning to you. How you doing?
Not too bad, lads. Keeping well. And yourselves?
Are you a good trash talker, Shane?
Decent trash talker, yeah, wouldn't be too bad. It's a tough art. It is an art form, but I guess some people are born with it, some people aren't. But Brady seemed kind of forced in his trash talk yesterday. Peyton Manning seemed a little bit more natural. And like when Tom Brady's trousers ripped as he took the ball out of the hole, after he holed that shot from the fairway, you kind of felt a little bit more sorry for him. You're like, not only is he crap at golf, but he hits the best shot of the round and rips his trousers. I think he made the joke afterwards that his trousers were attempting social distancing, so he was even trying a bit of joking after the round. But yeah, he didn't have the best of rounds, but look, he hit the shot of the day, so you can't feel too sorry for him. Too much
avocado ice cream, is that why the trousers were very, 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 very tight? They looked like there'd been like a seamstress stitching them on before he came on. It was like, they look a bit tight.
Yeah, and even on the trash talk stuff, I mean, our own Joe Malloy made the point on Twitter that maybe not for majors, you couldn't have players talking to each other during a major, but maybe for other events during the year, on a serious note, you could actually have players mic'd up, chatting to each other. You could hear what they're saying to their caddies a little bit easier. Maybe there's something in that, but yeah, probably for majors, it's a little bit too much on the line to have that option, but something worth thinking about for golf.
I mean, look, if it needs must in whatever the future is for sports broadcasting, let's all wait and see exactly what comes out of it. What's happening in the world of sport, Shane?
Yeah, we'll kick off with some soccer. The first steps, lads, on a planned return to League of Ireland starts today when players from 4 clubs will be tested for COVID-19. Dundalk, Shamrock Rovers, Bohemians and Derry City are all due to compete in European competition later this year and have been invited to play in a mini-tournament behind closed doors. That's at a Dublin venue in late July. The tournament is to act as a test run for the proposed League of Ireland resumption. That's in mid-August, and to prepare the teams, those 4 teams, for their European ties. The rest of the league is due to start testing on the 20th of June ahead of their training ground return the following day. Meanwhile, across the water, the UK's Department for Culture, Media and Sport will publish Stage 2 of its Elite Sport Return to Training guidance later. The Premier League are hopeful it will give them the green light to introduce contact sessions by the end of this week. A player from Bournemouth and a person from an unnamed club tested positive for COVID-19 during the top flight's second round of screening. Teams across the Championship will return to training later as well, a day after the league published the results of its first round of coronavirus testing. Just 2 positive cases were found from 1,014 tests there. Both people were employees at Hull City and have both begun a 7-day period of isolation. On the pitch then yesterday, of course, the Bundesliga was in action. RB Leipzig up to 3rd after they beat Mainz by 5-0. Timo Werner scoring a hat-trick that moves them within 7 points of leaders Bayern Munich. Elsewhere yesterday, pressure is mounting on Schalke boss David Wagner after his side lost 3-0 to Augsburg. Schalke now winless in 9 games and have scored only twice in that very poor run. And struggling Fortuna Düsseldorf in the other game were denied a vital win as Cologne came back from 2-0 down with 3 minutes left to earn a 2-2 draw. Former Meath footballer Colm O'Rourke has called on the GAA to open up club grounds around the country in a controlled manner for young people 2 weeks ago, the GAA president, John Horan, stated his belief that there was unlikely to be any GAA matches while social distancing to help stop the spread of coronavirus is in place. O'Rourke was speaking on News Talks On The Record yesterday. He was optimistic that there could be All-Ireland Championship action before the end of the summer. He wanted before August rather than the October deadline that John Horan had put forward. You can read Colin O'Rourke's full quotes up on offtheball.com. Loads of good stuff on there this morning, including John Barnes' interview from yesterday's Off the Ball as well. Some rugby news for you this morning as well. England and Saracens lock George Cruz will join Japanese top league side Panasonic Wild Knights on a one-year contract at the end of the season. The 30-year-old has been at Sarries since 2009. They, of course, relegated to the Championship in England for salary cap breaches. We mentioned the golf. Tiger Woods, Peyton Manning holding off a late challenge to beat Phil Mickelson and Tom Brady by one hole in that golf charity event, raising $20 million for COVID-19 relief efforts as well. The event played between four of America's biggest sports stars at a Rainy Medalist Golf Club in Florida, Tiger Woods' home golf course, of course. And finally, lads, one headline I never thought I'd have to say. British Formula One driver George Russell dominated the virtual version of the Monaco Grand Prix for his second successive E-Series win. Arsenal striker Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang was 16th on his virtual Grand Prix debut for McLaren.
Right, very good.
So it's all virtual these days, but the Monaco Grand Prix has taken place.
He's a man of many talents, finishing in the top 16. How do you qualify for this? Is there like you're famous, come on, is that how it works?
Essentially, yeah. I think there's a certain level of players who are actually really, really good at esports that we don't know, but they invite kind of players with an interest in Formula One that, you know, take part in the Formula One game themselves. They kind of put themselves forward. But yeah, Aubameyang's a strange one. I think there was photos doing the rounds of him back in training there the other day. He's lost a lot of hair, so he's kind of done the opposite of what the rest of us are doing in growing out our hair, and he's kind of seems to have lost some hair. So Aubameyang has come back a changed man, but apparently he's really good at Formula One on PlayStation. All
right, Shane, good stuff this morning. Thanks a million. As Shane said, plenty of good stuff up on offtheball.com. We'll tell you what the headlines are in just a minute, but here's what's coming up on the show this morning. We're doing the Cavan Mount Rushmore today from 9:15, so this is your last chance to influence things. Dave McIntyre is going to join us around about 9:15 today, so you can get us on WhatsApp 0879 180 180 or indeed on Twitter at offtheball. Alan Quinlan's going to join us to talk to us about the highlights of the last decade from a rugby perspective at the Aviva. We've done this for football last week, and it turned out the 4 penalty saves ended up winning. We've got some unusual stuff in this one, and Ryan Crowley's try features, and you know, in many ways was actually one of the most important moments in the Aviva over the last decade or so. Jacob Stockdale also features. He's going to join us on Wednesday to talk to us about his try too, so that's coming your way in just a moment. But first, we're going to do the papers.
OTB AM.
Now we're starting with offtheball.com. Rugby forgot that it isn't football on the game's major worldwide issues. This is Royal Nugent. Always interesting to hear him talk about this from a broadcaster's perspective, but also from a media executive's perspective too. So that's on the papers yesterday, and kind of follows on as well nicely from the stuff that we've been doing with Keith Wood's State of the Union. Great one last week with Andrew Mertens and Michael Cheika. United players had to keep Beckham and Ferguson apart after flying boot, and the stitches, Maria, that David Beckham needed. Would England have walked off if they were losing? John Barnes talking about racism and the response, a really in-depth conversation that John Barnes had with Joe Malloy yesterday, and worth digging out for loads of different reasons. Like, it's a full career retrospective, an hour and 10 minutes, and they spent about 20 minutes on the racism issue, but he's studying it a lot at the moment, talking about Liam Brady being his favourite player in terms of technique, and Colin O'Rourke also joining the opening or reopening of GAA pitches debate. We should be urging less caution at the moment. Certainly that's in keeping with a lot of views, including some in the papers today, which we'll get into in a moment.
The Irish Independent this morning leads with the story that COVID testing is the start for League of Ireland clubs. 4 European participants to have squads checked ahead of June 8th return to training. So these are Dundalk, Shamrock Rovers, Bows and Derry City. They're going to undergo independent medical procedures by remaining in their cars in a drive-through facility set up at each training ground. Initial results are due back by Wednesday. A photograph there of Tiger Woods playing at medalists last night, and search for top stars of past 50 years gets underway with Leinster's finest revealed. Meanwhile, how Munster are drawing new blood from the GAA heartlands, writes Rory O'Connor. Dick Clerkin is writing about how kids need more than GAA pitches for a new normal, and Eamon Sweeney is writing about the Bundesliga. Fox in the box, Werner looks man to keep Liverpool on top.
The Irish Times this morning is what I'm doing next. Sorry, I'm checking my list here. Yeah, Irish Times So I'm going to do the Irish Examiner next, and then I'll come to the Times. The Examiner here is O'Leary had huge respect for Galvin despite tussles. So this is Noel O'Leary and Paul Galvin. That one, the picture there is from 2012. O'Halpine regrets casualties of filthy, callous, cold strikes. Sean O'Halpine telling the Sunday Game last night. Flaws in GA anti-doping education is substance taken unintentionally. Declan Rooney has been speaking with Turlock O'Brien, who says there are flaws in the GA's anti-doping education programme, and former GA physio leading worldwide rehab of COVID patients. This is really interesting stuff here from Turlock O'Brien. I think the first time he's spoken about Ray Walker's positive test. The anti-doping education is provided every year, but there are certainly flaws in the whole system. The GA need to look at it, there's no question about that. The players have to have the education completed by the 31st of March, but the National Football League is over at that stage. It doesn't make sense that you're testing players and you haven't had a chance to complete their training. Unfortunately, he failed his test and there is nothing we can do about it at this stage. I think this makes sense, that there should be some mechanism to ensure that players have been educated and then they become part of the system. At the same time, there shouldn't be an opportunity for somebody to be on a doping programme and join an intercounty panel and put off doing the education until, so there needs to be some way to make sure that you can actually make sure that somebody isn't using the, I haven't been tested yet or I haven't been trained yet as a means of getting out of it. So I don't know what that mechanism might be, but certainly you should probably pull the date back from the 31st of March for your finalising your education to October, November. And if anybody joins the panel after that, they have to do it in the first week of joining the panel. Some mechanism needs to be evolved there. And then obviously Sean O'Halpine talking about the strikes. The aftermath was filthy, it was callous, it was cold, and he says he thinks about it every day.
The London Times this morning goes with the story about the return to play in the Premier League. League drops plan for hotel quarantines. So the Premier League will not require players to be quarantined in a hotel for either 1 week or 2 before matches resume. So this was obviously done in Germany for the resumption of the Bundesliga. The results show that the infection rates currently in the Premier League are very low. There were only 2 positive results from the most recent 996 tests, taking the total to 8 from 5 clubs. Bournemouth confirming yesterday that one of their players was amongst the 2 latest positives. So Premier League clubs don't feel it necessary to actually create this sort of bubble, don't actually feel that they need to put them into hotel quarantine before games. Tiger Woods there photoed again at the back of that newspaper, and Wenger's joy at Liverpool finally losing. Arsene Wenger has spoken of his pleasure at seeing Watford ruin Liverpool's chances of emulating his invincibles at Arsenal. It was a form of satisfaction, he says. We always like to be the only ones to achieve something. It was they who could only really go to the end, but it shows that it's difficult to repeat this feat. In any case, that day, I had a lot of messages from Arsenal supporters.
The Irish Times this morning, these are Malachy Clerkin's column. As the news gets better, can the pull of the field be resisted? And obviously they've got a picture of Peyton Manning watching his partner Tiger Woods putt yesterday. Damien Duff departs Celtic to focus on Ireland row with Kenny. That was confirmed yesterday by Neil Lennon that Damien Duff is going to be full-time with Ireland. O'Halpine rues remarks during player strikes. And George Cruz departs Saracens but retains hope of playing for England. I guess if he's only gone for a year and he's still quite young. The Panasonic Wild Knights. What do you think their drinking culture is like, Eoin?
Actually, it's we spoke to somebody from the Panasonic Wild Knights during the World Cup. They've got a very actually interesting culture where half the people are actually Panasonic workers and then half the team are actual professionals. So does that create more of a chance for drinking?
Maybe.
Potentially.
Maybe we only train in the evenings because the lads are working. It's like, all right, let's go. I mean, when your name is Wild Knights, I know it's, like chivalric night, but actually, Wild Knights by name, Wild Knights by nature, surely.
I hope so. It will be a shame to not get the benefit out of your trip to Japan playing for a while if you're not going to get a few good nights out of it, I'd assume, as a rugby player.
Malachy Clerkin's piece, as the news gets better, can the pull of the field be resisted? It's not a million miles away from the other conversations that have been had at the moment over the course of the weekend, making the case that as the numbers continue to go down, the key indicators of how well or otherwise we're doing when it comes to flattening the curve, the date of the 20th of July looks increasingly untenable, it says. While clearly well-intentioned, it's going to look like taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut soon enough if everything keeps going in the right direction. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, like that's 2 months away at this point. It does feel that it is still a bit of a leap to think that everybody will still be happy enough to go along with the GAA's return to play plans at that point. Like, you can see why they've come up with this date, why they've kicked things back, because caution is a way of proceeding at the moment that you can't really criticise whatsoever. I think what people could perhaps take issue with was the lack of consistency with the government's roadmap even, and the GAA saying, well, we're not going to have any inter-county championships up until October, for example, which kind of suggested a conservatism that was actually beyond how conservative the government wanted to be. And in and of itself, the government have been criticised for perhaps being a little bit too conservative with their roadmap as well. So it'll be interesting to see how patient people stay over the next couple of weeks. I think some of these arguments have been worded poorly. Like, I think Colm O'Rourke is probably leaving himself open to a bit of criticism when he talks about the risk in the headline that we have up on offtheball.com this morning. But I think what Malachy is saying is right at the moment. That's like, you are driving around, you are seeing I guess, small socially distanced clusters developing in more open fields, and they're obviously the publicly owned parks that you might see in Dublin, for example. But down the country, a lot of those parks that will be available to people will be GAA owned, and people can't get into them. They're locked out at the moment. And you can see why that is as well, is because of the insurance issue. And if anything does happen on one of these pitches, there's going to be huge insurance bills to pay. So you're in this kind of situation now where the GAA will need to make a deliberate move to bring forward the opening of these GAA grounds if anything is going to change. If the infection rates continue to nosedive, if the case numbers continue to nosedive, particularly in rural areas, you'd imagine the GAA will just have to say, well, this has worked out pretty well so far, thankfully, let us change our dates. I don't think they're acting out of any sort of, oh, well, we need to keep people out for the time being. I think that they are still acting with the belief that we're in a worst case scenario, or could have approached a worst case scenario. That has to change over the next little while. It's 2 weeks now since John Horan has spoken on this subject, over 2 weeks now. Like, have things changed a little bit over the last fortnight? I would have thought so. I would have thought the continuing nosediving of figures, nosediving is a bit strong, I'll accept. The decrease in figures surely means that John Horan could come out again, or the GAA could come out again and say, well, we are reevaluating this.
A couple of things strike me from that. We had Luke O'Neill on. He was like, well, you could have players playing in Kerry before other counties, depending on how the figures are going. And, at the time, people were like, oh, that's too difficult to organise. Now everybody's like, well, sure, look, the Western Seaboard's totally fine. Mostly it's the big cities that are having the issues. Mostly it's nursing homes. We've become a bit blasé about the fact that we're talking about an incredibly virulent virus that is killing people. A little bit. Just in the middle of all this, it's like, well, what if there's a cluster in a GAA club and you end up having one of those people be one of the statistics, the 1 in 1,000 people who didn't have an underlying health condition and who dies from this because we needed some championship action. Like, the other thing about the socially distanced training, do you have faith that a match isn't going to break out? I mean, we actually weren't in the same park yesterday. I'm almost certain because, anyway, I'm almost certain we weren't. So you saw a match and I saw a match. And I'd say loads of people saw matches. And it's very hard for a bunch of teenagers, or it's very hard for anybody who's kicking around not to suddenly kind of, why don't we just play 3-on-3 or 5-on-5 and the game breaks out? And like, maybe the science says there's not enough contact in those matches and that's a safe thing to do, and this age group aren't transmitting it to each other, and actually it doesn't exist in this part of the community at the moment, and it's fine. I don't know is the thing. There's just there's this surge of momentum, and Malachy uses the word momentum at the end. The year might not be done. Momentum will push it along, carried by its own weight. The year might not yet be done, after all. 2 weeks is a long time from this and Spillane and O'Rourke, where 2 weeks ago I was like, call the year, stick a pin in it, it's over. The year's finished. Not that much has actually changed. People are still dying of this thing. Still people in the ICUs. We still have the private hospitals on call just in case there's a second wave. good chance it's going to be a second wave in September, October. I don't know. I'm just interested in how the conversation is happening.
As I said, I think that Colm O'Rourke leaves himself open to criticism by saying we should be urging less caution. Like that's the headline on that piece. That's not something we should not be urging less caution. That is for sure. However, if we enter into an agreement with ourselves that we want to return to any semblance of normality, then we will have to enter into an arrangement where risk will be present. It is just about minimising that risk. Like you mentioned, it was Luke O'Neill you mentioned in terms of the potential for little pockets around rural Ireland to potentially spring back up and actually have little events, socially distanced training, perhaps in GAA clubs before the rest of the country. Like you take Kerry, for example, like the average daily increase in cases in Kerry over the past 5 updates has now dropped to 0%. Like these are the sort of figures that you're approaching now where you're like, right, okay, is this risk weighted in our favour? Is it worth the risk of something trivial, which it is, something trivial as GAA pitches reopening at this point? Maybe people will actually be able to make the case that an average daily increase of 0% still poses risks, because of course it does. But conversely, you could also say, well, the chances of GAA pitches opening and changing that drastically, perhaps that might not also happen as well. Like I hear what you're saying, like, and I 100% disagree with the idea that we should be urging less caution. Caution should be the number one thing that we are preaching at the moment. But I would also believe that there is going to be an element of risk no matter what happens next. And maybe the right thing to do is nothing and not reopen whatsoever and keep things tight and relatively locked down for the next few weeks and months at least. But then what is the figure that we get? What is the point where we are accepting that there is no risk? I'm not sure if that will actually occur this year.
Yeah, I actually, you're right. There will never be a no-risk situation, probably until the vaccine, and who knows when that's ever going to happen. So let's move on. The Star is Screen Giants. Hammers plan to beam fans' faces into stadium. So they've got a mock-up of a giant Zoom here of celebrating West Ham fans that the players will run over to and celebrate in front of. I mean, look, any port in a storm, let's work these ideas through and maybe come up with a better one. And there's a picture of somebody in PPE at Melwood disinfecting. I don't know what that actually is, but it's some gear that they're using for the ground staff, and then also League of Ireland stars to get tested. That's trying to get the European teams back for that one as well.
The Mirror this morning leads with Andros Townsend. Don't cheat lockdown. Players must behave and not let teammates down now that we're moving closer to full contact in training. There's a flashback there to all the great European finals, Liverpool 1977 and 2005. You've also got that story about Arsene Wenger as well, my joy at Cop, blowing unbeaten run, and as well that West Ham story. Zoom with a view for Hammers fans.
So that's essentially Arsene Wenger saying he was delighted. He's like the champagne swilling 1972 Dolphins every time that somebody gets beaten. And like, it's actually nice that he thinks that way. I think that there's that competitive urge still burns brightly within Arsene Wenger. And
it's great to see. Like Miami Dolphins is exactly what came to mind as well. He didn't exactly say he was popping champagne, but I would be disappointed if he wasn't. I'd be disappointed if he didn't have a few drinks.
Glass of dry Riesling. That's what he's drinking.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, that's mad to think that was like actually one of the last sporting events we had. Actually, I was about to say, well, we've had kind of lots of water under the bridge in a sporting sense ever since then. It's actually not. Was that like Liverpool's last Premier League game before lockdown happened?
Second last, I think. Yeah, or
second last. Like, I mean, good on Arsene Wenger is what I say. All the Arsenal fans certainly got a huge kick out of that because they can't get a kick out of much else at the moment. And Arsene Wenger with the Arsenal crest basically tattooed on his heart at the moment. It's not literally, but it's in his heart somewhere. I think that's just the way to react. We need to see more of this.
I'm just trying to find exactly when. So they played, the Atletico game was...
yeah, the last Premier League game is what I mean.
Yeah, last Premier League game, no. They beat Bournemouth and Chelsea beat them in the Cup, Watford. So it was the 29th of February. Since then, they've only played one more Premier League game, and they've obviously been bundled out of the Cups. The Herald, back page. Players set for COVID-19 testing. This is the League of Ireland story. Bows, Rovers, Dundalk and Derry begin return process. And Cleverly, integrity of league at stake. So, Tom Cleverly says the Premier League's integrity could be affected if players worried about their health choose to miss matches. I mean, this is true, right? If some players decide they're not going to play and other players decide they are going to play, what do? Like, at the same time, I don't know. I don't know what the correct scenario here is, where you force people to go to work and they're terrified of bringing home a condition, especially if there's somebody in the house who might be immunocompromised or whatever. Like, and yet the league has to continue, because the league has to continue. That's what has to happen. At some point, they're going to get to a point where maybe it's too soon. Maybe that's what's happening in England, given how badly the authorities there have handled the outbreak of coronavirus. Maybe if they were in an Irish scenario and they were seeing similar figures as we're seeing at the moment, and the rate going down as quickly as it is, maybe you'd be like, well, you just got to get out there and play. You've been tested, and they're taking every precaution. I suppose until you're happy that is the case, and I'd say we're still 3-4 weeks away from the restart of the Premier League, then I don't know. You can see what Cleverly's saying.
I think you let them have their free pass and not play if that's what they want. I think football clubs should be thankful that they can get back out onto the pitch and actually play football games. If they happen to be missing a couple of players, it's not ideal for a club down the bottom of the Premier League to be missing a top-class player, but you would trust that the player is coming to the club with legitimate concerns. I mean, it's in their interests, the player's interest, to be out on the pitch, to be out there playing, to be able to get a new contract, to be able to get a move, whatever it may be. There is no incentive for them to kind of ham up any sort of danger they're in, or to lie about anything. So it would be for their own safety, for their own concerns. And if there are genuine concerns, I think you give them a free pass. And as I say, the Premier League should just be thankful that they can perhaps proceed with 95-98% of their players in tow.
All right, next one.
It's the Irish Daily Mail.
Yeah.
This morning, all systems go as the headline. Premier League restart gathers pace as officials back close contact training. Championship clubs will return today after 2 positive tests. Pep back at City in PPE. Meanwhile, Project Restart continues. And Sean Oak says, I should have kept my mouth shut. Sean O'Gallagher admitted last night that he regrets he did not keep his mouth shut during the bitter heave against his former manager, Gerald McCarthy.
And then finally from me for now is the Irish News. Hamilton Celts play better under Lennon than Rodgers. Hoops Foundation chief hails Lurgan Man's impact. So that's Celtic playing slightly better football under Neil Lennon than they did under their last manager, also from the north. And so that Damien Duff going full time, I suppose it was to be expected, but it's probably good news, right, that Damien Duff is concentrating 100% on the Ireland job.
It can't be a bad thing, that's for sure. Like, we had wondered if there would be a similar situation to Robbie Keane, perhaps double jobbing for a while between club and country, and maybe it worked out really well for Robbie Keane. We still don't really know what the inner workings of that was, or what Robbie Keane's thinking is on everything, but I would certainly be of the opinion that if you can focus on one thing solely, then that is the way to go, and it seems that Damien Duff is going to take it that way. Like, it's really exciting that he is in the FAI camp at the moment, and that we're going to hopefully see his coaching career blossom, and this is going to be an important first step for him on that.
You got one more paper for us?
The Guardian this morning. Don't have it on my phone here, but I'm sure it'll appear on your screen in just a second.
I don't have a Guardian this morning either. So
Guardian is probably leading to do with something about Project Restart.
Yeah. We can guess. Not to worry. We didn't need the Guardian anyway. I do have a Telegraph for you for the last one there, so I can give you that. And Telegraph, this is actually interesting. Clubs call for clarity and protocols after positive tests. That's the Premier League story. But they also have a picture of Rafa Benitez, who apparently is keen to come back from China and go back to Newcastle. Benitez keen and Newcastle return under new owners. Not for him concerns about sport washing. And England pair could be heading to St James's Park. So he intends to build a mediocre team full of English players. John Stones and Ross Barkley, which I think would be a horrific waste of money for anybody to go and... but actually maybe that's exactly what Newcastle deserve, is a 10-year John Stones and Ross Barkley era, which starts right now, where everyone's like, these guys, they're really good, they're going to be the centrepiece of the England team that eventually, ghost of 66, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, just at the key moment, just when you think they're about to make a breakthrough, Ross Barkley misses an open goal and John Stone stands on the ball and Demba Ba nips in.
Who's going to be the Robinho is the question. Are Newcastle going to sign Erling Haaland?
Look, if they sign Erling Haaland, he ain't no Robinho. He's Alan Shearer or Mark II. That would be the perfect signing. Like, just go and spend 250 million now. Like, if this is your plan, I know you'd find some difficulties making that work from financial fair play, but either that or you're banning us from European competition for 3 seasons. That's grand. Within 3 seasons, we'll have Erling Haaland in the team.
Well, who is the Robinho now then? Is that Vinicius Junior or something like that?
I mean, at the time, everybody thought Robinho was going to be decent.
Yeah, like playing for Real Madrid, that's where the comparison continues. He'd scored 25 goals in 101 games. Not the worst strike rate. And, when he started off at Manchester City, he wasn't a bust straight away. The bust happened over a period of time. Robinho's only 36, by the way, and is still playing with in Istanbul. I did not know that.
I thought he had some legal difficulties. Anyway, let's move on. 8:40 this morning, 8:41. Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, is marking the 10-year anniversary of the official opening of the Aviva Stadium and its proud long-term sponsorship of the iconic venue. To celebrate the milestone, Aviva are paying tribute to some of the most iconic sporting moments of the last decade. Last week, Mayo man and former Sligo Rovers goalkeeper Kieran Kelly won the Aviva football moment of the decade, beating the likes of Shane Long's goal against Germany and Johnny Walters sending us to the Euros against Bosnia. Kelly set a world record for consecutive penalty saves in a shootout in the 2010 FAI Cup final as Sligo beat Shamrock Rovers. This week, we're looking at rugby and we want you to join in. You can follow Aviva Ireland on Instagram and Twitter and share your favourite Aviva Stadium memories using the hashtag #SafeToDream. Alan Quinlan, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Morning, lads. How are you?
This is going to be tricky enough. There's lots of particularly good moments that we've had because the rugby team have been sensational over the course of the last decade or so. The football team was a bit trickier because actually they haven't been great. There was a few difficult spells in the middle of all that and the football wasn't amazing. But we've had some big games in the Aviva and some big nights.
Yeah, there has been. I think there's been a few disappointments there as well. I was at some of the football games in the last couple of years that were utterly disappointing, but there's been a few rugby highs for sure in the last number of years. I only played in the Aviva Stadium a couple of times myself before I finished, so no real massive big days. First game there was against Leinster. We lost that, of course, and but certainly it's there's been some very, very, very important special days in the last 10, 12 years there.
We put Ryan Crowley's try in 2013 in as kind of an important moment in the evolution of Joe Schmidt's team. But also, I mean, maybe from that game we should have just put Cian Healy smashing the opposition and the greatest player of all time in Richie McCaw. Maybe that would have been the thing to do from that game.
Yeah, I think it's... that game was played only last week and I was watching back over it and it's still something I'm sure that kind of burns away at the players. The vast majority of those guys got to go on and beat New Zealand a couple of times in Chicago and then in Dublin as well a couple of years later. So it's 19-0 up, you're thinking against New Zealand, you're kind of pinching yourself. Then they make that comeback Sevilla try and give them a little bit of hope before half-time. And I just cannot believe, watching the end of that game again when Crotty scored in the corner, it's just disbelief really, because Ireland were doing everything pretty much right just to close out the game. It was got into the 80th minute. Then I think it was very, very harsh penalty that was given away against Jack McGrath. Probably legally and technically correct, but there's so many of these can be given at different breakdowns, and it was just heartbreak for Ireland in the end, but it showed how good that group of New Zealand players were.
In terms of moments, like it is right up there with, okay, it's not a great moment, it's the opposite of that, but the silence after that try goes in is eerie. That's my recollection of that, is just this eeriness. And then also, not that it matters, but Luke Fitzgerald actually blocks the kick for the draw. and it gets reordered to be retaken. And I don't know if it's made of that, because we don't really want to seem like complete bad losers, but it seems to me like that was a bad decision. Let's talk about some of the good stuff that has happened. Jamie Heaslip's try against Italy in 2016, World Try of the Year. It's not just for the finish, it's for this amazing bit of motion around the pitch. Jacob Stockdale's try against New Zealand in the game that we do actually win there. That's a sensational bit of skill.
Yeah, it is. Heaslip's try was phenomenal. It was a great team effort, support play, lent to the field, and one World Try of the Year, and deserves to be in there as a big moment. I think if you're playing against, with respect, somebody else than Italy, if you're playing England or New Zealand or France, it gets elevated even more. But Stockdale's try was a special try. I think on the back of brilliant thinking from the Irish team. It was one of those strike plays that Joe Schmidt was renowned for with Leinster and Ireland over the years, where they play a couple of phases infield and they go back on the blind side and rely on Stockdale to execute a brilliant piece of skill, and the ball sits up for him after the chip, and it's an incredible try at a really crucial time. Scoring there was a real hammer blow to New Zealand. It gave Ireland such confidence and belief in themselves. And I was actually standing beside Stuart Lancaster at that moment when he scored the try, and I remember kind of looking at him thinking, they're actually going to win this. This is one of those moments that you just feel a surge in confidence and belief, and they created that themselves. 2018, we've spoken about it so many times, how good a year it was, and the contrast a year later when they're in the World Cup and the Six Nations, the disappointment of that. So they were on top of the world then. Fortunately, they weren't able to continue that on, but that was a really special moment. And it was a special team performance, Ger. I think that's what will be remembered for, the intensity and the quality and the execution of the players that day was top class.
There's a couple of Leinster ones in today. Eoin Asawa's try for Leinster in the Heineken Cup quarter-final in 2011. And then there's another one, Leinster beating Saracens in the 2018 Champions Cup quarter-final. So these are the ones today. Robbie Henshaw's try against England in 2015 is up against Leinster beating Saracens in the 2018 Champions Cup quarter-final. That's the early morning poll. And then the afternoon poll today is Ryan Crotty's try in 2013 versus Eoin Asawa's try for Leinster in the 2011 Heineken Cup quarter-final. Henshaw's try against England in 2015 and Leinster beating Saracens in the 2018 Champions Cup quarter-final. Leinster beating Saracens is kind of one of those games where we probably in retrospect need to go back and put this Leinster-Saracens rivalry, it's finished now, for a while anyway. Maybe this one last game is going to be important if they actually get to play it. But they were the two best teams over a period of time in European rugby, and we probably didn't appreciate the clashes enough at the time.
Yeah, they were. There was a brilliant rivalry built up, and Saracens had won the competition the year before, and Leinster were trying to make a comeback and get their hands on the trophy again. So it was an incredible finish to the game from Leinster. Dan Levy was just sensational at his performance, I think, and right across the board from Leinster, and they blew Saracens away in the last kind of 15, 20 minutes of that game. And Saracens, for sure, a very, very strong side and two best teams in Europe. And that was a brilliant performance, and it kind of reinforced Leinster's strength and their ability to go on and win the competition that year as well. So it was a brilliant performance from Leinster, and one that they were utterly dominant, I think, in that last 20 minutes. And that's, for me, in rugby games, to have that kind of power, pace, strength, finishing out a game is exactly what you want, and they showed that in huge amounts of that in that game.
Was that their peak?
Yeah, you could argue and say that it was that for that group of players. Yeah, probably. I think, and even in the final when they went on to play the final against Racing, I think they just looked like a side who never panicked. Full control, no panic if something went wrong in a game, and they just looked like the ones that were setting the tone throughout any game, and if they conceded a score, just came up the field and just changed the course of the game. So I think mentally, physically, and from a technical point of view, they were certainly top of their game around then.
All right, so they're the quarterfinals. Robbie Henshaw's try versus England in 2015 is up against Leinster against Saracens in the 2018 Champions Cup quarterfinal, and Ryan Crotty's try in 2013 against East Tennessee was try for Leinster in the 2011 Heineken Cup quarterfinal. We'll tell you about tomorrow's quarterfinals. Tomorrow is Jacob Stockdale against Jamie Heaslip, and Brian O'Driscoll's farewell game versus O'Driscoll breaking the Six Nations try record as Ireland beat England's Grand Slam hopes in 2011. Alan, we haven't had a chance to talk to you yet since the announcements really over the last while about the return to play and what's going to happen. We expect games towards the end of August, which is plenty of time away really for everybody to see exactly how the rest of the world responds, and to, you know, if the figures keep going the way they are, to hope that there will be no issues around interprovincials being played anyway, certainly, and that might give us cause to hope for a programme of international games behind closed doors in October and November, and we might actually see the end of the European season as well. So the mood seems to have shifted quite quickly from gloom and despair, and I know the finances aren't great, but actually we should see a fairly decent programme of high quality rugby from August all the way through to December this year.
Yeah, I think it was welcome, the announcement. I think I was hoping for that to come in the last couple of weeks and get some clarity, like everybody else who's involved in the game. It's been a very difficult situation, and for other sports as well, not just for the sports people, but for the people working in the industry. There's a lot of worry around employment and future employment in the sport, and will people keep their jobs? But I think it'd be fantastic to see some rugby come back, and that announcement by Philip Brown on Friday was very, very welcome. I think the Pro 14 obviously is going to reduce the number of games. There's 8 games each to play. It'll be 2 games now to try and get into a semi-final for the Irish provinces, and a similar scenario in Wales, Italy and Scotland, where they all play 2 games, inter-provincial games against each other to try and push into the semi-final. And my understanding is the other 6 games will be a 0-0 draws, so they get 2 points each, and the points will be tallied up on that basis. And I think it'll be really interesting, Ger, to see what happens with the Premiership in England, because as it stands, Leinster are due to play quarterfinals against Saracens on the 12th of September. What way will Saracens be if they've no Premiership and they've no return themselves, if there is no return? But hopefully, to make it, keep the integrity of the competition, that they'll be back playing matches, and that the Gallagher Premiership will resume, and that it'll be pretty that it'll be pretty even and fair with that quarter-final. I know Leinster will be still in a much stronger position, the game being at the Aviva, but hopefully that will happen. But it's a welcome return, I think, to try and finish out the Pro 14 in Europe. It's really important that they are finished, I think. Obviously, people's health and safety and the players' health and safety is the most important thing. But it's certainly a welcome scenario that we have now a bit of light at the end of the tunnel with some rugby games.
Alan, what do you make of the potential of rugby without scrums?
You can't play rugby without scrums on, in my opinion. I think if you get to that situation that you're tinkering around that stuff, and you're better off not playing the games. I just couldn't see a rugby game going on without scrums. So for me, that'd be a no-no.
One of the other things that has been up for discussion is obviously a global calendar where it's aligned and the Six Nations gets pushed back a month or 6 weeks, and the Southern Hemisphere teams will play their international season at the same time. This seems to make a lot of sense. Like, the weather is rubbish in February frequently. Those games, it's windy, it's howling, it's a 3-3 draw at half time. We're like, oh, this is great. What a traditional tournament this is. Wouldn't it be much better if it was like 18-15 at half time?
Yeah, it probably would. You have a better chance maybe in March and April, as you say. I'm just not sure, Ger, how it's all going to work out. I think it's certainly a fairer scenario, because we've certainly heard at times that New Zealand are fatigued coming here, or Australia or South Africa in November, and the Irish, English, Welsh, Scots are fatigued going down at the other end of the year playing or playing the summer internationals. So trying to realign the calendar is a good idea. Will it extend the rugby calendar? There's talk that it'll be an 11-month season now with lots of breaks in between. I certainly, as a player, would rather pay 9 to 10 months and have 4 weeks off, go on holidays, come back, do your pre-season. So I'm just not sure how that'll all play out. Having breaks in between and having a couple of weeks off here and there, you can't really down tools as a player and go on holidays and chill out and mentally just switch off completely. So they'll play less games, but the season could be longer. But let's see how that plays out with the players. I'm sure the rugby players, World Rugby Players Association, will have a big say in what happens. They were the ones who probably voiced their concerns about extra games last year when the Global League didn't get the go-ahead. But ultimately, it's down to the Six Nations. If they want to move, and the clubs in England and France, that we will get a global season and we will get a World Nations League as well, which I think would be brilliant for the game.
Okay, so it's the old adage about not letting a good crisis go to waste. There is an opportunity here for major change to happen in the game, and it looks like the change is heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and to make it more to maximise the financial opportunities, we saw CVC buying a stake in the Pro 14. That's good news for the IRFU and the other unions here in the Northern Hemisphere. They own 28% of that. They have a stake now in Premiership as well and Top 14. So there is opportunities to maximise the financial windfalls with a global league and really take away probably it frustrates me sometimes when people say that these test matches are only friendlies. Technically, there's no trophies on the line, but if there's a global league, there will be points at stake now. So it will take away that scenario of these just being friendlies. And it'll maximise opportunities for players as well to play in that stage. And I think it will grab a global audience and increase the global audience. And that's the whole idea for World Rugby, to try and make the game more global. So having a global calendar, a global league, will certainly attract more TV viewers and people interested in the game. So hopefully that will happen. But it needs to be small steps. I think you can't go from where they are and jump too far ahead too quickly, because there's a lot of people have opinions and there's a lot of stakeholders in this that they need to get it right.
We're out of time now, but I wouldn't mind getting your views on the whole movement of players between provinces again, because we opened a bit of a can of worms in this towards the end of last week, and over the weekend on social media it has taken off again, where everybody's saying that I'm completely ridiculous for just raising the question, what's in it for Leinster to keep raising players for the other provinces, and what damage that ultimately does to the strength of the provinces. One very quick question for you, right? When you were playing with Munster and the Ireland team was underperforming, was it the inter-provincial rivalry that actually drove the senior international team's success?
I think so, yeah. It was certainly what happened in 2008, 2009 when Ireland won the Grand Slam. Rob Kearney challenged all the Munster players that there was more passion for Munster than for Ireland. I think the rivalries were incredible, and I just sensed that those rivalries, the interprovincial rivalries, are not there as much anymore, which there's for and against for that, Ger. I think player movement is important. It happens in New Zealand, Australia all the time. And I said it on Friday, if you're involved in Leinster and you're losing players like this, it's very, very difficult to kind of swallow that. The other side of it is, you look at their example of their open sides at the moment, Scott Penny, Dan Levy, Van der Fleer, and Will Connors. There's 4 top open sides. How do you keep all these players? It's just part of the reality now, and they're being punished for their success, really. So it's a tricky one. It doesn't sit well with everyone. It's a difficult situation for Leinster.
Can I just add, okay, we are totally out of time, right? But listening to James Collin and Brian O'Driscoll talk recently, when they were coming through, they were part of a national academy instead of a provincial academy. Could you have an academy system where all the academies are equal, and then as you rise from your academy, you become available, and that's when you have your draft system? So you don't have your draft system coming out of school that everybody goes through, and each of those academies are financed the same way. There's a sharing of coaching, a style of play that is similar, that is coached the whole way through, and so everybody who rises up in those, and whatever. So Leinster's is a bit bigger, given that there's a bigger playing pool, and you manage it that way, as opposed to when you join the Leinster Academy, you're a Leinster player for life.
Yeah, I think there needs to, a draft system is something that may happen in the future. But again, if you're Leinster, are you happy with that? If you're a little bit short in the other provinces, maybe you are happier. But I think
you're not. You'd be making the IRFU pay for this. That's the only. That would be the only way you would be happy with it. It's like, I'm not.
In simple terms, you don't want to be top heavy in one province where guys are hanging on there for 3 or 4 years. People criticise the David Nucifora and say, well, he's pushing players around. But like ultimately, you know, guys got to play matches, and people have to accept that if you want to make it and get on the national team and you're not playing in the provincial team, or you're down the pecking order, you have to move, and you should move. And if you can move within Ireland, for me, it's a better scenario. It's a win-win situation for the IRFU if you move within Ireland rather than going abroad. So it's a very complex situation. But again, it's the depth of what Leinster have, and they're the ones probably are most frustrated by this. But it's a reality, and it's a good place to be. I'm sure they'd much rather be producing massive amount of players than not.
Yeah, no, it's a good problem to have as opposed to a bad problem to have. Alan, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Cheers, lads.
Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, is marking the 10th anniversary of the official opening of the Aviva Stadium and its proud long-term sponsorship of the iconic venue. Celebrating this milestone, Aviva are paying tribute to some of the most iconic sporting moments of the last decade, and this week we're looking at rugby, as we've just told you. First quarter final is live. Robbie Henshaw against England in 2015, against Leinster against Saracens in the 2018 Champions Cup quarter final. Feel free to join in. You can follow Aviva on Instagram and Twitter and share your favourite Aviva Stadium memories using the hashtag #SafeToDream. We're coming up on the first anniversary. The first proper pieces about the anniversary of Saipan have all been written, so if that's not your thing, then you just turn away from the media now for the next short while. The Cavan Mount Rushmore is being carved as we speak. Dave McIntyre and Paul Fitzpatrick of the Anglo-Celt are going to join us in a couple of minutes' time. We're going to get to Phil Egan next, but let's just bring you this. John Duggan Dan and Johnny Ward got stuck into the 2002 World Cup, and of course Saipan came up.
People, as you know, people will complain about us talking about this, yet there will also be enough of a volume of people who will text in and show that their feelings on it remain as raw 18 years on, and the debate goes on. And it feels like we can never avoid this topic. Like, the one thing about maybe the Stephen Kenny era is that it might reflect a slight break from it, because everything from Saipan has had some kind of it keeps coming back. If you think of in the last 10 years, we've had Roy Keane back as an assistant. We've had Mick McCarthy back. We had the John Delaney years, which are basically a product of this, because he was flagged as almost this great reformer around that time, and actually, there was something worse coming down the tracks. So we can all trace it back to then, and we almost need this clean break from it now. But we can't avoid it, because the same cast of characters keep coming back up.
His grievances were completely legitimate, but also what he did in terms of that meeting, which itself probably shouldn't have happened. I think Mick McCarthy's got to deal with this in a far better way. But on the flip side of that, I haven't spoken or heard from many players who give out about Mick McCarthy in terms of his man management. And I don't think there's anyone who would say that he's not an inherently quite decent bloke. So you have a very decent bloke dealing with the situation badly. But on the flip side, is he dealing with a guy who's basically just going to explode here at any moment anyway, and who's already sort of been half talked back into the camp? So, whatever your version of history is, it's wrong. And I think whatever our version of Saipan it's wrong. It's just trying to be a bit more right.
Your version is very, very well put. Very well put. And I think that there's a version I would agree with completely, that Roy Keane, amazing player, completely right about the facilities, but Saipan was it was a ridiculous place to have it, 4 hours from Japan, but it was a rest and relaxation. They were only there for a few days. It happened on the Thursday. They were going back to Japan on the Friday. You could have waited. McCarthy was wrong to call the meeting, but what was said to him undermined him. First of all, I'll just finish this. He was undermined in the interviews, and then in the meeting, he shouldn't have called the meeting, shouldn't have provoked Roy Keane. But what Roy Keane said to him then, maybe it happens all the time in football, but I think as some of the senior players said, they'd never heard anything like it. Yeah. The dissection of him and his character. And that is how he is as a manager. Okay, maybe you can all patch it up and get on with it for another month. But as a manager, he had to act because he was put in an untenable position.
Mick, you gave them the north. Phil Egan, good morning to you.
Good morning. How you doing?
What do you have to say?
Fire
again.
I'm so glad. I actually was pretty oblivious to all this. You know, I was away in Greece for the summer. I was on a Greek island. Think back then as well. You know, we didn't have WhatsApp, so I don't think I even had a phone, because you would have had to get a certain type of phone that you could get text messages. So I think we had one phone between the household that was over there. So I knew obviously something had happened, but I wasn't aware of what was going on, obviously in Japan or in Ireland. But I'm glad I missed it all, because I'm sure there would have been many's a row, whereas I was just living the dream on a Greek island, you know, working hard, playing hard.
Well, sure, look, you'll be there for the whole summer.
Yeah.
Right.
The World Cup. And obviously as well, World Cup kickoff games around that World Cup were very early in Ireland, but you have an extra 2 hours. So like the Ireland-Germany game, when Robbie Keane scores, I don't think I've ever gone as nuts for a goal. Like the whole pub, you kind of saw it at the World Cup, the shots of English fans where pints went everywhere. That was pretty much what happened when Robbie Keane scored. And I actually was thinking this season, obviously watching the Premier League with VAR, imagine the goal was disallowed for some reason because of VAR and you just wellied your pint over someone. You can't take it back.
No, you can't. That's when the fights start. Listen, Timo Werner is going to be joining Liverpool, apparently, according to all of the papers. It has to happen because there was a Zoom call between the manager, who's not actually the manager of the player currently, and the player. Are you allowed to do that? Is that not the ultimate of tapping up, or does it not actually count if it's virtual? If a manager taps up a player on Zoom, does it actually happen if nobody bears witness to it? And then he scores a hat-trick. So clearly Jurgen Klopp is inspiring Timo Werner to greatness before he even arrives at Liverpool.
Yeah, and he was on a bit of a drought, Timo Werner. Obviously, I think Germany had high hopes for Timo Werner for the World Cup, and obviously Germany didn't fire, so Timo Werner didn't fire himself. But yeah, I think it would be a great signing for Liverpool, and people would say, where does he get into the team? But the problem for Liverpool is the front three, obviously brilliant, and they've played a lot of football. The problem is if one of them is out, there's a bit of a drop-off. So if you've got Timo Werner, you can bring him in. Also, you can tweak your formation. You can play a 4-2-3-1, which Klopp has done, and you can drop Firmino into that one in behind the three. So Timo Werner fits in there. And, you know, that front three pretty much have, apart from the odd injury here and there, you know, they've had a good run of it. So you'd imagine at some stage that run could end. So you need to have good backup, and Timo Werner would provide that backup.
The Bundesliga obviously is back before everybody else. What's the quality of football been like?
Quality is as good as it ever is in terms of the Bundesliga. It's one of the better leagues to watch. You know, there's always really good attacking football. A lot of young, talented players. These are players that we're going to see a lot over the next few years, whether they go to Premier League clubs or they move to Spain. But the Bundesliga has a really attractive brand of football. And yeah, obviously it's not ideal. There's no fans there. I don't think anyone said it was going to be the same. But I think this is just something that's going to be the norm for the next few months, maybe for maybe the next year. We don't know. I mean, obviously, the good news for European football was that this is the second weekend done. Obviously, the big game tomorrow, Dortmund and Bayern. So it looks like Bundesliga has resumed. Looks like things are going according to plan. Premier League set to resume next month. The test results that were brought out in the last couple of days, that's positive that there was only 2 out of almost 1,000. Spain have been given a return date. Italy are working towards it. So my feeling on it, lads, was once Germany got up and running, the others would follow. I just couldn't imagine, I couldn't foresee the likes of Germany, Italy, Spain get up and running in the Premier League thinking that they can't do it, because the Premier League pride themselves on being the so-called best league in the world. And if they couldn't get back up and running, but the other superpowers in European football could, the Premier League would probably think it wouldn't reflect well on them, regardless of what's going on in the UK.
Yeah, go on.
Did you watch Leipzig against, like, presumably if you're talking about Timo Werner, you were watching Leipzig. The crowd noises, I'm not sure, was it done at the other games? Mine's Leipzig was the only thing I caught, and it seems that it was one of the ones to have crowd noises at it. And you forgot that you were watching an empty stadium while this audio is being pumped into your living room. Are you a fan of it, or are you not, Phil?
I don't think it's a bad idea as long as it's not that high. But I obviously watched the games on Saturday, so I think it depends on who you're watching the games with. I know the World Feed are giving you the option to listen to the noise piped in, but BT certainly didn't have it on Saturday or last weekend for the Dortmund Wolfsburg game last Saturday, or the Bayern and Eintracht game. So I'm not sure what the situation will be for tomorrow's game between Dortmund and Bayern. But do you know, the way I find myself watching it is I probably have the volume down a little bit, and after a while I'm just focusing on the football. Obviously I don't speak German. I don't know what the shouts that I'm hearing. So it'll be interesting when the likes of the Premier League get back up and running, where you can actually hear the calls from players, you can hear the calls from managers. I don't know, is that something that certain managers are going to have to be wary of? If they have some colourful language at times, are they going to be told maybe to tone it down a bit?
The tape delay, they had a delay on the golf last night, and they just pulled the fader whenever there was cursing, a la Big Brother back in the day.
The old dump button.
Mm-hmm.
Radio's friend.
Exactly. I think it really adds to it, Phil. I'm a big fan of it. Like I think that it's not being pumped into the stadium. It's not having any material effect.
Yeah.
It's complete window dressing, and I think it works well. It really feels like you're watching real life football again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, as I said, the World Feed are giving you the option, or giving the broadcasters the option. But yeah, as I said, I'm just happy to have live football back. And I know it's like there's a lot of people saying it's just not great to watch because it's like a training session. But you know, this is something we're just going to have to get used to for the next while. And I think after last weekend, once I had seen it, obviously I'd seen it a little bit before the lockdown, because the PSG Dortmund game was behind closed doors as well. And we just get used to it, and you just have to hone in on the football. And the football has been pretty good so far.
That is interesting. I think that's the most important thing. I didn't realise, Eoin, that that's how it worked. So it's on the TV screens, but not actually in the stadiums. Why don't they just pump it into the stadium?
Good question. I presume it is just kind of a matter of entertainment, isn't it? Like we've used the comparison here quite a bit between this and canned laughter. Like the actors can't hear the canned laughter. Like the footballers are part of the entertainers, you know, and we are the ones being entertained, and it is for a television audience only. Like it's because you would assume that the home ground can do whatever they want. Is there a rule precluding home grounds from playing music through a speaker, for example? I'm not sure there is. They can certainly do it after a goal is scored. But could they, for example, pull up the jeer fader, for example, when the opposition team is in possession?
Or
boo. Get some boos in there.
Put pressure on the ref. Yeah.
The way they do it in the NBA, when they start playing the kind of tense music, almost like a variation of the Jaws theme, whenever the opposition is in possession, and then it's something far more lighthearted and jazzy when your team, the home team, is in possession. Like I wonder, is that like if it's a possibility of somebody doing, like it could be worth innovating in that sort of way over the next little while.
I'd be up for as much experimentation as is required to find the best possible product until we get fans back in the stadium. So who knows what that's going to be. So Bayern Munich against Borussia Dortmund tomorrow night, Phil. Proper football in the darkness, under lights, that's meaningful. This is about as good as it's going to get for a while.
Yeah, now it's a 5:30 kickoff for us, so 6:30 in Germany. And so this is the first real high-class game. It's the top two. And 4 points in, if Bayern are obviously in the driving seat, and you'd have to imagine if Bayern win tomorrow night, that's it, done and dusted. Even if they get a draw, I think that'll be it, done and dusted. They're playing better. You know, watching the Dortmund game against Wolfsburg are hard to break down. They were quite stubborn. Obviously, Hummels went off at half-time, and Wolfsburg sensed that maybe with Emre Can dropping into that three-man defence, there was a bit of a weakness there, because he's not as physical, he's not as vocal as Hummels, and obviously he's only just coming back from injury as well. But watching Bayern against Eintracht, when they went 3-0 up, at that stage you're thinking Bayern could, you know, really put one on Dortmund on Tuesday. Then obviously Eintracht score a couple of goals from set pieces, and maybe that gives Dortmund the bit of confidence to think, yeah, they're good, but they have weaknesses. And both teams do have slight flaws, but there's going to be some unbelievable matchups there. You look down the Dortmund right, the Bayern left. You've got Alphonso Davies has just been a revelation playing as a left back. So you'd imagine Sancho comes in. He obviously came off the bench. He set up the second goal for Dortmund. And obviously they play wing backs, and you've got Hakimi playing as a right wing back. So that whole channel is going to be unbelievable to watch.
Yeah. All right, Phil, good stuff. Looking forward to seeing that. We'll talk about it again on the show tomorrow and again on Wednesday after it actually happens. So Bayern against Borussia Dortmund happening tomorrow night. Now, Mount Rushmore Cavan is up next. We're going to be back with Dave McIntyre and Paul Fitzpatrick. But first, here's a clip from Saturday's panel. We're looking back at some great GA rivalries. You can catch the full piece back on the OTB Podcast Network. It was Kerry against Cork first up. Enjoy.
Oh, look, from my point of view and probably Cork's point of view, not only beating Kerry, but we were on the road to trying to win an All-Ireland for 4 or 5 years, and invariably every year you'd have to get through Kerry to get there, even twice, possibly. And I suppose we always had the bit of inferior complex in the county because I suppose you're going out to Clarny and you don't win there too often. And I suppose it was the game to play in every year. And I suppose I actually never won down in Clarny. A lot of draws, a couple of shaky refereeing decisions, but I suppose if you ask me, was it more important to win in Clarny or win the All-Ireland, I'd have still taken the All-Ireland. So at the end of the day, it was still probably the All-Ireland in my mind that was the most important thing. But as I said, like beating Kerry down there or in Páirc Uí Chaoimh was one of the biggest stepping stones to getting there.
Darren, he's got an early dig on you there.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
The OTB Brief. Everything you need to know about sport every morning. Need to get on top of the day's sports news? Well, the OTB Brief is the only sports update you'll need every morning. With all the breaking stories, post-match reaction.
They had one more day to rest. We were really in trouble to build the team.
And the best bits from off the ball, all in a 10-minute podcast.
Oh, sweaty palms. Of course, you guys know what it's like, but that was nervy, yeah.
The OTB Brief, online every morning from 7 a.m. on offtheball.com, the Go Loud app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.
Look up on Patrick's Hill. Who would you take down? Who would you take down?
OTB AM's Mount Rushmore.
Right, we're doing Cavan. I feel a little bit uncomfortable about this. We've got Dave McIntyre doing it. Dave, this is the most tenuous link we've had anybody doing as a selector so far. So you're, first off, going to have to prove your own credentials before we go any further here. Explain to us why you are selecting. Good morning to you, first off. How are you? I hope you're well. First off, though, prove your worth, Dave.
This has been as bad a start to this as I could ever have dreamt of, or indeed had in my nightmares. Questioning my Cavan links and my credentials to actually be part of this process. As all I need to say, Ger, and I say this to my father many times, I am more Cavan than he is. I am purebred. Both sides of my family are from Cavan. 3 of my 4 grandparents are from Cavan. My grandmother was from Monaghan, which makes my father less of a Cavan man than I. What sort of further extolling of my own credentials do you require?
I just want to make sure that everybody out there understands them, Dave. I know this, you know. Sometimes, like Matlock, I know the answer to the question before I ask it, but there are people out there who are, why is that guy? He's a dub. He's got a Dublin accent, lives in Dublin, lived in Dublin all his life. What's he doing picking our Mount Rushmore? I just want to make sure that everybody out there is happy with it. Paul Fitzpatrick, good morning to you. How are you? Do you accept Dave McIntyre's bona fides for this?
Yeah, I think we'll take him as a true blue. We take everyone we can get, Jared, at this stage.
Very good. Well, people will be familiar with Paul's work in the Anglo-Celt, but he's also an author and a historian when it comes to the great Cavan football teams too. So the way this is going to work is the way it's worked forever. Dave picks his 4, Paul gets to edit that, fix it, put one on, and that's it. Then it's done forever. we should get into this. I think Hugh Horrigan at the Boar's Head is going to be our final pitch, which might be important when we get to the football. We should start with the bits where I think everybody is going to be in agreement. Who's your first person, Dave?
Well, firstly, I should say that when this was asked of me, I initially thought this will be pretty easy. Because while Cavan has an incredible pedigree for sport and Cavan's people are as proud of their sports history as any other county, they don't necessarily have the huge list of names that maybe a Dublin or a Kerry or a Mayo or a Kildare might have had. But it's only when you get into it and when I put it up on Twitter that I realised this is not going to be anywhere close to being as easy a process as I thought it might be. And the amount of people who got back to me on Twitter suggesting names, I mean, the list is as long as my arm. So I think you're right. There will be a couple of them that are absolute certs. I'm going to start with one of them. And I'm going to start with Katrina McKiernan. I would find it very difficult for anyone to put forward an argument that she shouldn't be on it. What do we need to say about Katrina? She's regarded as one of the world's best ever cross-country runners. She's won 4 successive silver medals at the World Cross Country Championships between 92 and 95. She won gold at the European Cross Country Championships in 94. She's won the London Marathon, the only Irish woman to do so. She's won the Berlin Marathon. She's won the Amsterdam Marathon. She's still the Irish marathon record holder, ran for Ireland in the Olympics. And I would also say it's not even just that her career, because since she's retired, she's become a fitness trainer. She's become an expert on the mechanics of racing and how to get people to race in a safe and an injury-free way. She's a legend of Cavan sport, but she's also one of the great distance runners on the national scene as well. And interestingly, when I was doing my research, she was only born 2 days apart from Sonia O'Sullivan, which is incredible. And the two of them had a really good rivalry as well in the 90s in particular. It's very difficult to see a Mount Rushmore somewhere up around the Sleeve Russell and not have Katrina's face on it.
Yeah, Paul, this is as clear-cut an example as any county has had at any stage. Katrina McKiernan straight up there, first ballot.
Yeah, she's first ballot. Like, I think if you couldn't find one person in Cavan who wouldn't put Katrina McKiernan on their Mount Rushmore jar. I think it's not alone her achievements. It's the fact, the context of her career, where she came from, like Cornafane, rural Cavan, absolutely no tradition of athletics. And at the time, nobody got into running. She always tells a story about how she used to go running on the roads, and she'd get one of her sisters or her brother to go with her because she was she was so shy. She's a very shy personality, and someone local spotted her, one of the old characters, and walked into the local pub, McShane's in Cornafane, and he made the comment that there's a daughter of John McKiernan's out running the roads, and I wouldn't mind, but the McKiernans are good people. So that'll tell you what we thought. They thought this was sort of deranged behaviour. So she had that to go up against as well, and then she had no facilities. I've interviewed her a few times, and she always says that, you know, people talk about facilities and altitude training and warm weather training. She didn't have access to any of that for a lot of her career, especially in her early days. But she just had a fierce desire, competitiveness, and she just went running on the fields. The family had a farm. She ran around the fields and she played some camogie. And then I think it was 1988. She entered the schools cross country with very little training, probably no formal training, and she won the Irish schools cross country, which then she knew she had a talent for it, and she just worked really, really hard and had a huge Cavan support. I mean, when Katrina was doing really well in the early 90s, the football team was doing badly. Like, went 7 years in a row without winning a game championship, and a lot of that football support, which the football base would be in that area where Katrina's from, but a lot of that sort of transferred over to her as well. So she got a whole county behind her. So absolutely 100% first pick for me.
I don't think we can underestimate just how difficult it is to win the London Marathon and how big an achievement that was as well. Like, the cross-country career is brilliant in and of itself, but the marathon running career is absolutely spectacular.
Oh yeah, like 2 hours 22. 23 was her time, which is still the Irish record, and that we're 22 years on from what she won in London. Incredible, fastest ever debut marathon by a female runner. Like, just insane what she managed to achieve. But probably was unlucky in terms of the cycles of her career that she didn't make a splash at the Olympics because she was injured in 2000, and then she didn't feel she had enough preparation done in 2004, so she had to miss out there in those 2 Olympics, which probably gave her the edge. Give Sonia the edge in the national sport and consciousness, but really there was very little between them.
Is there a Katrina McKiernan legacy that you can discern, Paul, in terms of athletics clubs that sprouted up on the back of this success, or is it going to be an outlier that there won't ever be another Cavan Katrina?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ger. It possibly was an outlier. I know Katrina, even though she lives in Dublin, and I know she runs every day in Phoenix Park, and as Dave said, she's involved in chai running and stuff like that. But she comes back every year for this annual event called the Run with Katrina, where they get like maybe the guts of 1,000 runners at all levels and walkers, and you get from the elite runners around the country. It's part of a national series of races, so you get the elite runners. You also get all these people who are like that, go out for a fun run. And that's huge. And she runs it herself, and she's really competitive. And she tries to win it, and she usually does win it. And she runs the 10K part of it, and maybe I don't know what her time would be, but it'd be maybe half an hour or so. And generally she wins it. But yeah, there is a legacy. There's been some good athletes came after her. I suppose Claude O'Reilly is one that went on a scholarship to Stony Brook College in New York, middle distance runner as well. Kind of like Katrina, she was tall and really, really good over the ground. But, Katrina, it wasn't a thing that the support structure was in place for her, so it was kind of hard to replicate that. I think she was just one in a million. No matter where she was born, she was going to do it, but she just had that inbuilt drive.
Yeah, look, it's truly a brilliant international career coming, as you say, from a small farm in Cavan and running in the fields and running on the roads there, to go from there to win in London and Berlin, as Dave says, straight up on Mount Rushmore. I think we should go handball next, Dave, just so the areas of contention we leave to the end.
Yeah, I think the most areas of contention will surround Gaelic football. And look, Cavan are the aristocrats of Ulster football, no matter how difficult life may have been for Cavan GA fans over the last half a century or so. But if we move towards the handball situation, and look, this is a name that was always going to come up, and I probably would have been in a very difficult position to try and explain away his absence if Paul Brady wasn't on the Cavan Sporting Mount Rushmore. He's an absolute legend of the handball world. Paul is, I know, a huge handball aficionado himself, so he'll be in a better position to explain why what Paul has achieved is as incredible as it is. But just to go through some of the numbers, like, he was actually born just 13 days before me, and yet he's still been winning titles almost up to his 40th year. He is he won his first world title in 2003. He was the first Irishman to win that. It was really the reserve of Americans and Canadians before that. And this is a championship that's only held every 3 years. He won 5 in a row, which is astonishing, that durability and the ability to come back every 3 years and fend off the competition despite, the advancing years. He's won more US national singles titles, 11 of them, than anybody else in history. From an Irish point of view, he's won over 20 All-Ireland titles between singles and doubles. He was the man that really replaced Duxie Walsh, the legendary figure that dominated Irish handball for so long. And Duxie was the name that was on everybody's lips whenever they were asked, maybe as a casual follower of the sport, who was the big name in the sport. It was always Duxie Walsh. So then along came Paul Brady. And he won some of his titles in the most unbelievable circumstances, with ruptured muscles and tendons, broken fingers. He won a couple of his titles almost on one leg. And that's before you mention the fact that he was trying to combine that with almost a decade-long career wearing the blue of Cavan in the inter-county setup as well. He was first brought into the panel in 2002 by Matty Kerrigan, and the duress his body was under for about a 5 or 6 year spell where he was trying to compete on the professional circuit in the States on the handball court, and there was a lot of money to be won in some of the biggest tournaments, and then keep himself fit to play club football with Mullahoran and play in the All-Ireland or the Ulster Championship in the league with Cavan. It almost broke him in some ways, and eventually he had to shy away from the dual role and focus solely on his handball career. But given what he's done for Cavan and the pride with which Cavan people hold him up around Mullahoran and throughout the county, it's very difficult to see a Mount Rushmore without Paul Brady on it.
Paul Fitzpatrick, explain to the rest of the non-handball world just how amazing Paul Brady was.
Yeah, I'm just laughing at Dave calling me a handball aficionado. It's a thin line between aficionado and zealot. But I'll try not to be too...
Go for it. Take the pulpits.
Yeah, well, I suppose, first of all, with Paul Brady, there's a tradition in handball where there would be a great champion who would dominate a certain era, and then someone else would take over. And that's been the way right back to the 1930s. You had John Joe Gilmartin from Kilkenny was a great player in the 20s. And then you had this fella called Paddy Perry from Roscommon. And that went right through in the 60s, 70s. Obviously, as Dave mentioned, Duxie Walsh came through there. So there is that tradition where you would have a dominant figure. More often than not, you would have. But what Paul Brady did was he actually changed the game. In a way, you could compare him to Stephen Tuxton because he changed the way the game was played. And you asked me earlier on about the legacy of Katrina McKiernan. You can really see it with Paul Brady because I'm involved in the game and I can see all the young boys and girls coming up playing handball. And they're all playing a different style of handball than anyone played 20 years ago, which is handball traditionally was, the analogy that was used was a sword and shield. So if you imagine a handball player in the court, your right hand, let's say you're right-handed, your right hand was your sword. That's what you used to attack with. And your left hand was your defensive weapon. That was your shield. And they always talked about, both needed to be equal. Paul Brady came along and he played sword on sword. He literally was an all-out attacking player, got himself into phenomenal shape, was unbelievably powerful. His core strength and his lower body strength in particular was amazing, which meant that he was always set for the shot. So he could play at this level of intensity that players just couldn't cope with. Their legs would go, and it didn't matter how fit they were. Only the very, very top players could really live with Paul Brady in a long game. Now, that's not to say that he had it all his own way. Over the years, as Dave mentioned, he had so many things to overcome. In 2003, he beat Tony Healy in the World Final in Croke Park, and Paul cramped up at the time. He used to get a problem with cramp at the time because he was one of these really, really driven individuals, and it had meant so much to him. He used to get so much nervous tension, and he used to cramp at the time. So he cramped up, and there's a rule in handball: you can take an injury time out, but there's no injury timeouts are allowed for cramp. That's in the rule book. So there was an American referee in the game, and he just totally emotionless, and he just walked in and said, "No, game over. You've used up your timeouts, and you can't take an injury timeout." And Tony Healy, from Cork, who he was playing, to his eternal credit, said, "Let him take my timeout." Tony didn't want to be handed a world title like that, so Paul came out, took Tony's timeouts, which is totally unprecedented in the sport, and got a bit of a rub from a physio, and I suppose the adrenaline and everything else. Went back and he managed to win the game, literally hobbling on one leg. Then he went on and won the Worlds again in 2006. Then in 2009, he tore a muscle on his quad, and literally the muscle detached from the bone. So he went to see a specialist. He was doing a box jump in the gym, and the box slipped. So you can imagine the violence of that. What it did to his legs. So he went to see a specialist in London, and the specialist was like, "Look, kind of preparing for life after competitive handball." And he was saying, "You don't understand. I'm going to be going to Portland, Oregon. I'm going to be playing this tournament." And that was the sort of determination that he had. So he went on. He won it in 2009. Then he won again in 2012, and then 2015 he won it in Canada. And now there's actually been another chapter to his career, because after he won in Canada, he beat this young fella from Cork called Killian Carroll, who is absolutely incredible. He's as incredible an athlete as there is in the country at present. He's sort of, you compare him in stature, he's sort of like Tony McCoy, I would say. He's about 5'6", absolutely lean, totally fearless, and throws his body around the court with absolute abandon, has no care for his own safety, and he's an extraordinary young player. He sort of took over from Brady quickly. No one saw it coming. And in 2016, he beat Paul in America. 2017, he beat him again. 2018, they were on a collision course in the Worlds, and Paul had to pull out before the semi-final again with injury after getting a badly sprained ankle. 2019, Brady, in his 40th year, comes back and wins the US Nationals. Now, he didn't beat Killian Carroll directly. Killian Carroll was beaten along the way, but Paul won the tournament at 40. So that was an unbelievable sort of a last chapter in his career. And he's still going. He was going to have another crack at it this year, but it looks like with the lockdown it mightn't happen. But he's still there. Yeah, incredible. And also as a footballer, he was a really good footballer. You know, he probably was unlucky to play in a team that there was plenty of talent in that Cavan team, but for different reasons they didn't make a breakthrough. But he was a very good footballer and extremely good club player. He won 3 senior championships. Okay, so Katrina McKiernan is on. Paul Brady's on. There's no doubt about that, is there, Dave? He's straight on, right?
Well, look, there may be someone who can put an argument together that will turn my head, but I find it highly unlikely, Jared. This guy, there aren't many multiple world champions in Irish sport. Paul Brady is one of them. There aren't many that have won 5 in a row over a 12-year period. I mean, how can you not have him on the mountain? Yeah, and we've definitely not got the right person to make an argument against him with you today, I think.
the bases are loaded here, and that's fine. Paul Brady, straight up on the mountain as well. I think everybody can agree with that. So the next two, I don't think we have agreement on. Who have you got, Dave?
This is an incredibly difficult part of the process. We know Cavan is a GAA county, a Gaelic football county, and they were one of the great GAA counties, certainly for the first 50 or 60 years of the GAA, and they won 5 All-Ireland, and they've won 39 Ulster titles. And over the course of those years, there have obviously been legendary figures, and we're going to argue over this one, I would suspect, and it's probably going to be an argument that I won't be able to win, because I will be in a position where I'll end up arguing against myself, because I'm not even 100% sure that I've picked the right two people. There are obviously so many notables, and Cavan fans of the last 25 years of my ilk, I started following Cavan maybe around 84, 85. And there's only been one Ulster title in that time. There's been one Ulster title in the last 51 years. 1997, if you go back to 1969 for the one before that. And that 1997 day in Clonus, when Jason Riley and the goal against Derry and the jersey over the head, that is still the single greatest day of sporting fandom in my life. So it's very difficult to look beyond guys like Dermot McCabe and Larry Riley and Stephen King, who was just such an inspirational captain, and he soldiered for Cavan for so long. And Dermot obviously won an All-Star and played international rules for Ireland. Larry did as well. But the achievements of the Cavan teams of the 30s and 40s and 50s, I think, will probably trump it for me. So the first guy I'm going to go with is John Joe Riley, who, like Katrina McKiernan, was from Carnifane. He won 2 All-Irelands. He captained the side in the Polo Grounds in 47. He was again in part of the team that won the next year in 48. He won 11 Ulster Championship medals, which is an unbelievable haul. Throwing a league medal, 4 Railway Cup medals as well. And this, of course, is at a time when the Railway Cup was a far more prestigious event than it became in latter years. He was named to the football team of the century in 1984. And then when they followed it up at the end of the millennium, he was named to the team of the millennium in 1999 in the centre-half back position. And one thing about John Joe Riley as well, and I kind of put him in the sort of the Jim Morris and James Dean sort of a category, he was taken all too young. So tragically, he picked up a really bad injury while playing a game of Gaelic football at the age of 34, and he died later that year in 1952, the year of Cavan's last All-Ireland. And if anything, his premature death has added to his legend over the years, because Cavan people never got to see him grow old, never got to see or hear him talk about his days in a Cavan jersey. They only ever remembered that young superstar, that swashbuckling centre-half back. His dad and his brother also played for the county. He's one of just 8 men to have been presented the Sam Maguire as captain on at least 2 occasions. There's a great song that was written about him, Gallant John Joe. He's just one of the legendary figures of not just Cavan GAA, but the GAA in general over the last 130 years. And he definitely deserves a place on this mountain, in my opinion. He's one of the great Gaelic football names.
Paul, what happened? How did he die?
Yeah, it's a contentious one. I think people thought the Shawnee Johnston controversy was the start of the Cavan and Kildare rancor, but John Joe Riley actually picked up an injury playing in a club match in Kildare. He was playing against Ardclough, and something happened. People say that he got a kick. Something happened in the game anyway. He had previously refereed a game against where they weren't happy with some decisions. So people said there was a bit of vendetta against him, but it ended up that he got a very bad kidney ailment, and he was in the army in the Curragh. See, John Joe had a huge connection with Kildare. He was gone from Cavan really from the age of 18 on. He was down in the Curragh. He applied to join the cadets. So when I wrote the book about 47, his nephew Brian, who was a chemist in Naas, gave me some of his old letters where he had his character references and stuff like that, when he applied for the cadets, and then the commendations that he got from his superior officers. So he was described as absolutely first class officer material. And he went on then. So this, aside from his football career, he was just a leader of men. He was the youngest ever commandant in the history of the Irish Army, and was earmarked as a future chief of staff. Hugely popular figure among his teammates around the country. He was just one of these absolute supermen. You know, in the days before TV, he was sort of like a Quinlan type figure around Ireland. the fact that he died young definitely added to his luster as well, you know. And as the song says, new players may come, old players may go, but we never have the likes of the gallant Chancho. Like, I do think, he's a towering figure, but I am going to argue with it, Dave.
Well, we probably don't need to get to the argument just yet, do we, Ger?
Well, we can do how many? So you've picked John Joe Riley from the 47 from that era. What's your other footballer?
Well, there's two of the GA names that, I mean, there's a couple that we certainly should get a mention. Like Ollie Brady was Cavan's first All-Star award winner. That was back in 1978. But like many Cavan players over the last 50 years, he was unfortunate enough to be part of a Cavan side that wasn't really achieving anything. I'm thinking of guys like Charlie Gallagher, who would be a real favourite of my father and my uncle's generation, for example. He was a real swashbuckling attacking forward. He was a showman in the 60s and was part of the Ulster title winning side in the late 60s. And a lot of people, while he did win an All-Ireland, would love to see him in the mix. But the two men that, outside of John Joe, that I would have to see talked about in real detail, one of them is Mick Higgins and the other one is Hughie Riley. Now, Mick, his story is just absolutely incredible. And what I always knew of him, and for example, Mick, when he died in 2010, he was actually buried in the same cemetery as my grandfather and my grandmother and my grandaunt, and it was something I always was aware of, knowing that he had seen out his final days in Virginia, where my father grew up. And I would have asked my uncles and father about Mick Higgins over the years, but Mick Higgins was born in New York, and then he moved to Cavan. Depending on where you read, I'm sure Paul will have the exact detail, but between the ages of 5 and 10. But he played in 5 All-Ireland finals. He won 3 of them. And 1947 was appropriate as well, given that it was back in his native city of New York. He won in 48. He was the captain in 52. And he scored 7 of Cavan's 9 points in the replay win that year. 7 Ulster Championship medals. And that alone would almost be enough for someone of his stature to make it onto the mount. But then you look at what he achieved after he retired, because he's most remembered as a player, obviously, but his record as a manager and a trainer, I mean, absolutely unbelievable. He retired, then managed Cavan. He led them to 3 Ulster titles on the sideline. He led them to the All-Ireland final in 59. That was the last time Cavan contested an All-Ireland decider. And even then, that's something special. He moves on to train Longford here. Now, Longford have a rich GA history, but they haven't achieved much on the inter-county scene. They've won 1 Leinster title, and that was in 1968. And who was the manager? Who was the trainer that year? It was Mick Higgins, the Cavan man, which was absolutely astonishing. And that was 2 years after he led them to a league title, and they beat that unbelievable All-Ireland 3 in a row winning Galway side in 1966. So that's incredible in itself. He moves on to Donegal, and he's part of the training regime that helps them win their first Ulster title in 1972. He was also a really well-renowned referee. There was actually 1 year where he took charge of an Ulster semi-final in the 1950s between Derry and Down, and that was despite the fact that his Cavan team, which he was training, were awaiting the winners of that semi-final in the final. Could you imagine trying to sell that today in today's GAA? Texaco Hall of Fame entry in 1989. And I read a really amazing piece by another legendary GA figure in Eugene McGee, who in the last decade, as well as Mick Higgins, we've obviously lost. He said that Mick Higgins would be considered at least in the 25 best players of all time. And I'll leave my argument for Mick Higgins with something that Mick himself said. He was once asked what his legacy should be, and he said that I never hit anyone. I played a clean game and I was never put off. So he would be my 4th man on the Cavan Mount Rushmore. I haven't got into Hughie Riley, who was the only person to have been involved in all of Cavan's All-Ireland titles as a player and a manager. Maybe he's worth a long mention as well, but that's Mick Higgins.
Right. Will we do your football, Paul, before you make one final case for somebody outside of the world of football? So you actually do want to put Hughie O'Reilly on your mountain, is that right?
Yeah, I want to put Hughie O'Reilly on mine. I describe him as the godfather of football, not just in Cavan, but in Ulster. Because if you look at his list of achievements, so Cavan's first All-Ireland at any level was a junior All-Ireland in 1927. Armagh had won a junior All-Ireland before that, but Cavan won this in 1927, which was seen as a big breakthrough. Hughie O'Reilly was the captain of that team. In 1928, Cavan got to the All-Ireland final, lost to Kildare again. Hughie O'Reilly was on that team. In 1933 and 35, they made a breakthrough and they won 2 All-Irelands, and he played midfield on both of those. He played in 37, where they lost the final in a replay. Then he took over the team in the 40s, and he was over the Cavan team when they got to the All-Ireland final in 43, which they again lost in a replay. 45, they lost by a point to Cork. And then the glorious era kicked in where he was over the Cavan team, where he won in the Polo Grounds in New York in 47, again in 48. Lost the All-Ireland final in 49 in a replay, and then won the All-Ireland in 52. So by my count, I was just totting it up last night, he was involved as a player or a manager, including replays, in 13 All-Ireland senior finals. He was involved in every winning Cavan All-Ireland team, including that first junior team. And he was a very, very interesting character in that the family had connections in Cork. So he was O'Reilly. He obviously was a Cavan man, but I think his father had lived in Cork for a while. The family lived down there in Cork City, but he was heavily involved in the Republican movement, and he was active in the War of Independence and the Civil War. He was in Tehran for a while. He moved back up to Cavan. I think it was something to do with the political end of it. Maybe there was a bit of heat on where he was. He came back to Cavan, and Cork's loss became Cavan's gain because he moved to the home of an old relation outside Coothill in Tullivin, and became heavily involved in the Coothill Celtic club, and who were a famous club. They were like one of these. They were obviously the Celtic colours, and Charlie Gallagher was one of their most famous sons. But they were a really famous club, and Hughie put them on the map, I suppose, back in that era. He also went on and trained Coothill when they won 3 in a row. There were only 3 senior championships in the mid 1950s as well, and he was a famous disciplinarian. He ran his the Cavan football team along military lines. Literally, he literally would get them to march up and down in the mornings and things like that. Stuff that he had probably learned when he was involved in that kind of stuff himself. Wasn't a man for the limelight at all. And once he sort of, after the 50s, he finished with being involved in football with his local club. He just lived a quiet life in Coothill. He wasn't involved really with anything else. Now, he's regularly listed on whenever there's a list of the top 100 most influential GA people or anything like that, he's well up the list. For me, I would say we couldn't have a Mount Rushmore without Hughie O'Reilly on it, because without him, you'd wonder, would Cavan have had the success they had? He was involved in so many breakthrough successes. From the start, he was the man that was there, that was breaking new ground. And when Hughie O'Reilly stepped away in the mid 1950s, then you had that period of flux, which I always think is probably one of the most fascinating periods in Ulster football. People talk about the early 90s, obviously, when Ulster was winning everything, but in the late 50s, so up until 1955, Cavan were beaten in an All-Ireland semi-final replay by Kerry that year, and everything was going good. This is where we were and where we always had been and where we should be, winning Ulster out of Cantor, getting to All-Ireland semi-finals. A good year was defined by if you got to the All-Ireland final or not. The Ulster Championship was taken as a given. But suddenly, in 55, Tyrone came in 56 and won Ulster, and then they retained it in 57. Then in 58, Derry came and won their first Ulster title. That year, Cavan didn't even get to the Ulster final for the first time. 59, Down broke through then, won Ulster, hammering Cavan in the Ulster final, and then 60 and 61, Down obviously won 2 All-Irelands. So you can just imagine the devastation there was in Cavan. There were people writing letters into the Anglo-Celt saying, like, this is an absolute national scandal. Because bear in mind that the Anglo-Celt described Cavan's win in 1933 as an event of international import. So this is what football meant. But Hughie O'Reilly had stepped away from the Cavan team, so maybe there was something to do with that as well. That period of flux, that 7 years, is when Cavan opened the door and let the other teams in Ulster in, and we never got to back out of the house, unfortunately.
Before we get to the debate about, from the football perspective, who's going up, I want to just take us on a little bit of a tangent here, Paul, because you didn't have 2 footballers, you had 1 footballer, and you had a golfer on your mountain.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I'm a friend of the pod, as they say on Golf Weekly, and I know Dave is a big golf fan, and I just cannot believe, Dave, that they haven't got Leona Maguire in this list. I'm staggered. I'm actually disgusted. Looking through it, what she has achieved. I spoke to a few people in the lead up, and I mentioned that I was going to be coming on here. A couple of people said to me, Leona is a little bit young yet. She hasn't done enough yet. I would be of the belief that if she put down her golf clubs tomorrow and never played again, that she has done enough to be on any Mount Rushmore. Like at 25 years of age, if you look back through her career, she was winning adult scratch cups at the age of 12, along with her sister Lisa. Obviously, she won the Scottish Amateur at Troon at the age of 14. Like the ordinary hacker, the likes of me, if I go to Troon, I'm driving past and I stop to take a photograph. At 14 years of age, she's out there playing on this course and beating the top amateurs in the UK. She obviously went on then and she won the Mark McCormick medal as the leading female amateur in the world. Like she broke Lydia Cole's record. Like that in itself is just an astonishing achievement. She got a scholarship to Duke University. Was the top collegiate player then. Turn pro, has already got a top 5 finish. Did her year on the Symetra Tour. Got her LPGA card and already has a top 5 finish. And like, if you think about the depth of talent there is in golf, you know, and nobody loves handball more than I love handball, but and I definitely wouldn't demean Paul's achievements, but I would say Leona is right up there because the depth of the field that she was competing in, and also we talked about Katrina's the context, you know, where Leona comes from in West Cavan and Ballyconnell. It's quite a deprived area. There would have been a lot of emigration over the years. Not a big history of sport and achievement. Like at the moment, most of the GA clubs in that area would be in junior ranks, and that's always been the way. Really, going back, even back in the 30s and 40s when Cavan were winning, you'd have maybe one player from West Cavan, and that's when football was the only sporting outlet there was in the area. So there was no big tradition of sport and achievement there. And what Leona and her sister Lisa achieved is just off the charts. I really think, Dave, that got to be up there.
Right. What normally would happen now is we'd make Dave pick his 4, you would make your change, we'd hear one last pitch, but I'm going to actually play the last pitch now because I think the last pitch is going to essentially, hopefully decide who's going up from a football perspective, right? So from the Boar's Head, this is Hugh Hurricane talking about who he thinks from a football perspective should go up, and then we'll decide whether or not Leona takes somebody off. So have a look at this.
Good morning, lads. When we think of Cavan legends, we think of Mick Higgins. Born in New York, came home and won a senior championship with Mount Nugent. Went on and played for Cavan in 5 All-Ireland finals, wearing the number 11 jersey. He won 3 of them, one of them in New York. 7 Ulster titles, 2 National Leagues, all-time All-Star Award, Texaco Hall of Fame. He moved on then and took over the Cavan Seniors, won 3 Ulster titles and a National League. He took our minors over, brought them to an All-Ireland final, 1959, narrowly beaten by Dublin. He went on then and took over Longford. National League, O'Byrne Cup, Leinster title. Moved on to Donegal, won the first Ulster title in 1972. Lads, this lad has done it all. Where is this man's statue? He should be up there on top of that mountain. We have Leanne Kiernan, Leona Maguire, Paul Brady, handball, Katrina McKiernan, Dermot McCabe, Stephen King, John Joe Riley. Lads, Mick Higgins is on the wall of the Boar's Head. Put him up there, lads.
Right. That's an order, Dave. Looks like it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having this argument with the man himself in the pub itself once we get through this COVID-19 crisis so we can get back to something similar to what life used to be like. I'm glad he's made the argument for Mick Higgins. He made it as a better Eve than I could have done. Paul's argument on Leona is, look, it's well made, and I think I'm following in the footsteps of the off-the-ball representative in a lot of these Mount Rushmore discussions, in that I've used her age as a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card, in that she is 25, and I can't imagine there are many 25-year-olds that have achieved more than she has in her young years. But it's just that she's only been a professional for the last couple of years. She's had her first top 5 finish, as Paul said, this year. And I think she's going to keep achieving at an unbelievable level. I read this morning, 135 weeks at the top of the amateur world rankings, which is still a record. It's an outrageous achievement. And if we were to sit and have this discussion in 5 years' time, I don't know, I'm not the first to sit in this chair and use this line over the last few weeks, she would absolutely be on the... And Leanne Kiernan was mentioned there as well. She's only 21. but she's already played 15 times for the Republic of Ireland. She's doing really well at West Ham United. And if her career continues to progress the way it is, there's a very good chance she would be up there as well in a few years' time. But
okay.
I'm not arguing against them. I just think their body of work is not yet complete. And when it is, they'd probably be up there because they're incredibly talented. And they're inspirations to particularly young girls who are trying to make their way through the sporting world. They can look at what the likes of Leona are achieving and continue to achieve and really take heart from it.
Okay, but you're sticking with your two footballers, Mick Higgins, John Joe Riley, Katrina McKiernan and Paul Brady. They're your final four until...
Yeah, I want to mention just a couple of other people quickly. I want to mention Killian Sheridan, who's still playing. And as someone said to me this week, the longest serving professional athlete in the history of Cavan sport. And he's an inspiration to a lot of young guys who are maybe struggling to make it in England or Scotland. And he shows what you can do if you've got the heart and the spirit and the risk-taking ability to go somewhere else and try and ply your trade. He's played in Israel and Bulgaria and Poland and New Zealand. So I wanted to mention him just for what he's done over his career and the way he's kept at it. Andy Murray, professional boxer from Cavan, two-time national champion, came very close to a world title in 2011. He deserves a mention as well. But when it comes to making that final decision, look, it's a bit of a chicken and egg. Would there have been a John Joe Riley and a Mick Higgins discussion if it wasn't for Hughie O'Reilly? I mean, you know, that's an argument that is very difficult to win or lose because I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to it. But he was, as Paul said, the godfather of Cavan
Okay,
football.
but you've got to pick.
I wouldn't be upset if Paul forced would have Mick or John Joe off the mountain. It's outrageous that I'm about to say that a man who was named the centenary GAA Team of the Year and the Team of the Millennium is not going to be on it. But for me, what Mick Higgins went on to achieve as a manager with Cavan, Longford and Donegal, and along with what he did as a player and what an unbelievably good centre-back he was and a free taker as well, or centre-half forward rather, and a free taker, just about edges John Joe Riley off the mountain. And I know I'm going to be hung for this because there are a lot of people of Cavan stock absolutely screaming in fury right now. But this is an impossible job. And if I have to choose between Mick and John Joe, I'm just going to go with Mick Higgins.
So hang on. You made a change. Who's on your mountain, Dave? Mick Higgins?
Yeah, well, I'm only going to get to hold on to three of them. So in the understanding that Paul is going...
No. You leave Paul make his own mind up here. That's how this works. You pick your four. Who's your four? Who's your final four?
I'm not changing from my four. My four are Katrina, John Joe, Mick, and Paul.
Right. What were you at there, Dave?
I was trying to lay the groundwork for what I fear is about to happen.
Okay. Paul Fitzpatrick, the floor is yours. The mountain is yours. You can replace any one of those four with anybody in the world you want, so long as they qualify for Cavan's Mount Rushmore. Who's your change going to be?
I think John Joe's got to come out and Leona Maguire's got to go in there.
I mean, that was clearly what he was going to do, Dave. We all knew that. You've not been paying attention. I think that's a great...
I'm horrified.
That's a great choice.
Not because Leona Maguire is on the mountain. I mean, she's a genuine superstar. But I just can't imagine in my mind's eye on a drumlin somewhere in North Cavan how this mountain face will look if I see four sports people on it and one of them is not the face of John Joe Riley. But this is Paul's doing, not mine.
No. It's a collective decision. So Paul Brady, Katrina McKiernan, Leona Maguire and Mick Higgins is what we have at the moment. This is your, as Chris Tarrant would say, final answer?
Is that my final answer?
Paul, is that your final answer? Leona's on?
Oh, sorry, Jerry. Yeah. Leona for me is right up there. Yeah, 100%. I think it'd be a travesty if she didn't get on. Obviously, Mick Higgins, John Joe Riley, icons of the game. Like Dave, I think Mick. Obviously, John Joe passed away at 34, and Mick went on and achieved so much after he stopped playing. Probably achieved enough to get on, even if he had never kicked the ball, because he also trained a lot of Ulster Railway Cup winning teams in the 60s as well. And he was also a great greyhound trainer. He was one of the very best greyhound trainers in the country. was just that sort of individual that could turn his hand to anything. And he actually trained Longford at the same time as he trained Cavan. And the Cavan players of the 60s remember Mick was a very placid, serene man, very laid back and totally modest, but just a very calm type of individual. But the one time he ever really lost his temper was when Cavan played Longford in a playoff match in Croke Park once, and Longford were beating Cavan easily at half time. And he was absolutely raging because he said the Cavan people are going to be laughing at him here, that he had a foot in both camps, but his own Cavan team couldn't beat Longford. And he went mad, and in the second half, Cavan turned around and managed to win that game. So there's actually a really, really good story in Mick Higgins altogether. Like he was born the day Michael Collins was shot, and he obviously was born in New York. His father was from Shema Mayo, and his father had been a bus driver in New York, I think, and was a very talented runner out there. So you can see where the athleticism came in. But I think we could talk all day about it. I think Higgins has got to be up there, but Leona as well.
And where are we going to build it, lads? Paul?
It's got to be down in West Cavan, Quilca Mountains, I think.
Fair enough. We'll take that, Dave, unless you had a better suggestion.
No, that's fine. I just feel sorry for Paul. His next trip towards Killashandra or Kernafane is going to be a difficult one. It's probably a part of the county that Paul will be. He's probably going to take a break from visiting for many years, I would suggest.
What about TB12? Asks Barry Corrigan. Tom Brady. Tom's great grandfather, Philip F. Brady, was a Cavan native who emigrated to the San Francisco Bay Area during the late 1800s. Drum Lane GAA Club are claiming him. So yeah, TB12. Certainly his dad. Anyway.
On that note, John McEnroe was raised during the week as well. Apparently, one of John McEnroe's great grandparents was from Cavan as well. So, if we were going to go down the great granny rule, they would have been worth a shout.
Well, his brother did play Davis Cup for Ireland. Katrina McKiernan, Paul Brady, Leona Maguire, and Mick Higgins. That is it for Cavan's Mount Rushmore.
OTB AM's Mount Rushmore.
My thanks to Paul and to Dave for putting that together, and to Hughie for giving us our last pitch as well. A bit of debate there at the end, but that's a pretty special looking mountain, and of course it can only get better with Leona Maguire's achievements coming in the next few years. That's it for now. The football show tonight, Monday night rugby, the news round, and much more coming your way from 7 o'clock. If you missed anything this morning, you can catch it back on the OTB AM podcast, sports pages, Rugby with Alan Quinlan, Football with Phil Egan, and Cavan's Mount Rushmore. Subscribe to OTB AM wherever you get your podcasts. We're back tomorrow morning with the latest sports news. Brian O'Driscoll joins us live, and we're talking Lance Armstrong. See you then.
OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.